Hello, and welcome back to the Alexander Society. I'm your host, who didn't come up with a clever, funny descriptor for myself or my co-host this time around, Derek, joined by my friend and co-host, who, again, doesn't have a funny descriptive title that's topically relevant to the discussion for today. Tim, how you doing, Tim? Please move on. I feel like an idiot right now.
I'm doing good, but shame on you for the cringe. Shame on you.
And I forgot so much shit doing this topic for some reason. I don't know why. I made up the rules at the last second. I didn't even come up with a good intro bit.
And I just woke up from a fat ass nap, so
I'm fumbling the ball on this one. Well, you don't. The only prep work you have to do on your side is just get the booze. So, like,
I've had the booze for like a week and a half.
Yeah.
Has it been a week and a half? I think it has.
Yeah, you texted me like your bag secured text. I don't even know when it was. Doesn't matter.
So, Derek, how are you doing? We didn't get to that part.
I'm doing pretty fucking good. I'm not gonna lie.
My boy's getting a new job. Woo woo!
I got a new job. I'm getting a big, like, compared to what I was previously doing, a big fat paycheck with some health insurance. I'm going to be able to go back to the dentist. And today, to celebrate, I went out and I bought myself my first miniature kit for Warhammer 40k because I decided, since I'm going to have a little bit of spending money, I'm going to actually give myself the luxury of a hobby that's a little pricey. So I'm pretty fucking stoked. I'm pretty stoked, bro.
Yeah, you spent a lot of money, my brother.
But to be fair, a lot of this stuff is going to last me a while, and it's not going to last. It's
going to be like model kits. You're going to have a backlog.
Yeah, I've got like 11 models right now, and I plan on. There's only like 2 more that I'm planning on getting right now, and then after that, I'm just going to like slowly work my way through painting these.
Might have waited till the first new paycheck, but hey, can't judge you.
I happen to find myself on a pay period where I didn't have any immediate outstanding bills, and I've got enough to cover my next one, so.
Fuck it, we ball.
Fuck it, we ball. Tim, how are you doing, my guy?
I think I'm getting sick, so if energy's low on this episode, apologies, my dudes.
How dare you?
Curse you, common cold.
Have you tried just punching your immune system?
Unfortunately, it has no hands for me to throw.
That is no excuse. Weakness will not be tolerated on this podcast. Yeah, so Tim, go ahead and tell our fine viewers what you're drinking tonight.
So, I've gone back to my favorite brewery in Oklahoma once again. This is probably going to come back time and time again because they put out so many good sours. Prairie. This time I went with Rhinestone Rancher, which is basically a green apple sour, and it tastes delicious.
Oh, that sounds so good. God, I am such a slut for green apple. I swear to God, I will kill for a good green apple flavored anything.
I can see it. And then I probably went too cheap on my rum. I probably should have spent a little bit more because it smells like cheap vodka does, and you immediately made a bad decision.
Yeah, I'll do it.
But I'm going to be a big boy, and it is Flor de Cana. It's imported by William Grant & Sons, New York, New York. It's a product of Nicaragua.
Ooh. Okay, so maybe it won't be so bad.
It smells like rubbing alcohol, so. Yeah, what are you drinking this week, Derek?
I fully just completely like full on like rural southern small town Kyle with like the tap out t-shirt and the sideways flat brim in like the shitty like early 90s Chevy, like full on small town Kyle on these selections. So for my sipper, I went with the Beast Unleashed. It's the hard monster.
Hide your drywall.
It's I've tried punching walls before. I just hurt myself more than the wall.
Sounds like a skill issue.
This is a Peach Perfect, 6%. I have extremely low expectations. And then for my shots, I'm going back to old reliable Jack Daniel's Tennessee Apple. Like, again, green apple theme.
I love how we both got a green apple themed.
Yeah, I was legitimately just thinking, like, earlier this morning, I was like, I've got time to go to the liquor store, but I've got some Tennessee apple back there. I really want some Tennessee apple. So you know what? Fuck it. We're doing some Jack. To hell with all of you. I'm drinking my Jack Daniels.
Jack Daniels, if you please.
Is that a reference?
It's a song.
I never heard it.
Because you're a scrub. So, Derek, you want to get into this week's rules?
Oh, yes, of course. So here in this illustrious society of ours, we abide by an ever-changing set of rules. Rule number 1. Every time our guy loses a battle, we take a sip.
Rule number 2. Every time Derek mentions Procopius and the Secret Histories, we take 3 sips.
And rule number 3. Every time the Emperor screws our guy over, we take a shot.
Sounds like an Emperor, not gonna lie.
Yeah, this is a special one, because this is an emperor a lot of people have heard of and hold in great affection.
So, Derek, who are we learning about this week?
So this week, I'd like to state ahead of time for our audience, if you notice that the way that I'm presenting this story is going to be a little different, it's because I'm trying something new. I'm kind of experimenting. Instead of writing out like a full script that I normally do with like just all of the information just kind of neatly organized and all that kind of stuff, I'm doing some bullet points instead, because this is a topic that I'm already pretty familiar with, because this is actually what I'm planning on studying once I get to my undergrad and graduate work. This is like the era of history that I'm actually going to be researching. So I'm already pretty familiar with it. So I figured I'd try like some sort of more casual, sort of conversational, flowing approach to this. Maybe it'll help, keep these episodes a little shorter and a little less stiff. Yeah. Real quick, you want to go ahead and take a shot?
Yeah. Cheers.
So this topic that we're talking about, I kind of danced around a little bit, but
yeah, who are we learning about, Derek?
I don't know. There's a possibility you might have heard this name before, but I'm not counting on it. We're talking about a guy named Flavius Belisarius.
Nope.
Okay, that's what I figured. This guy is really, really fascinating, not just because of like what he did, but because of the time that he lived in. It's an era of like Western history. Like, we really don't talk about or learn a lot about in just either in public school or like just like popular history, anything like that. We're talking about the earliest part of the Middle Ages, like within the first 2 or 3 generations after the fall of the Roman Empire.
Interesting.
Like, everything that I'm going to talk about is going to be within 100 years of when the Roman Empire fell.
Oh, wow.
And it's really interesting because this is the period where the ancient Europe kind of stopped being ancient Europe and became medieval Europe.
Okay.
And a lot of it had to do with this guy. He and the emperor that he served, Justinian the Great.
I've never heard of the emperor either.
Justinian's up there with like one of the most important figures in human history that we don't really learn about.
Yay, horrible American schooling system.
Yeah. Because despite the fact that he lived and ruled so long ago, a lot of the stuff that he did, we even here in the United States, we experience like on a daily basis some of the stuff that he did.
Oh, lovely.
I'll get into that during the episode because I actually think you're going to be really interested in that part. But it'll be kind of tangential to the story, but I will get into it.
Gotcha.
But Belisarius himself was a general. He was a military commander. And he is the most soldiery sort of soldier guy that you will ever hear about in your entire life. He was
the military man.
Yeah, he was just a rugged, hard-headed son of a bitch till the day he died, and he never took any bullshit. Well, that's not true. He did take a lot of bullshit, but it was because he had like an honorable he had an honorable heart in a political system that was
set up against that.
Yeah, this is the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. The term Byzantine comes from this empire, so like that's the kind of environment that he finds himself in. And I'll get a lot more into it. But first, let's lay down some background for this. Let's get into a little bit of background. A lot of this background we've already talked about pretty extensively because we've done a few like late Roman Empire sort of topics so far. We did Attila the Hun. We did Nicholas of Myra. So a lot of this is going to be kind of...
Is this why this is your studying time? Why we've done a lot of the topics we have?
Kinda. This is a topic that I did have in mind since we started the podcast. This is one of the topics.
How come it wasn't in the doc?
I think I just forgot to put it in there, but this is one of them. I don't know why I didn't put it in there actually. Basically, we get to the year 476 CE. Is kind of when the Eastern Roman Empire is considered to have fallen. That is the year that a Germanic general in the Roman legions overthrew the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. I said Eastern. The Western Roman Empire fell. Yeah, and that was the last Western Roman emperor. It was Romulus Augustulus. He was literally a baby at the time, so it wasn't too difficult to overthrow him.
Didn't that happen a lot? Just overthrowing child emperors and kings?
Yeah, that happened. Yeah, that's how a lot of civil wars throughout history started, is you just go and just try to kill a baby because the baby has a crown on its head.
Maybe, don't put a child in emperor in role?
Yeah, well, it's whenever whenever an infant becomes like a king or an emperor or something like that. Yeah, they always have a regent. Anyways, yeah, the last emperor of Rome gets overthrown by a German general. That German general rules Italy for about 10 years. And then a Gothic army crossed into the borders of the Roman Empire into the Balkans, marches on into Italy, and then overthrows this guy. And those Goths become the Ostrogoths. They found the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy, and that's who is ruling Italy during the time of our story. And that is kind of what the rest of of Western Europe looks like at this point. It's all these different Germanic tribes that have moved in and claimed like chunks of land from the Roman Empire. Up in Gaul, you have the Franks, which will eventually become the French. In Spain, you've got the Vandals, who will eventually become the Asturians, who kind of sort of through a lot of twists and turns eventually become the Portuguese, and then the rest of the peninsula is ruled by the Visigoths, who eventually become like the Spaniards. And they're all kind of fighting against one another. You also have, this is an important one to this story, you also have a German kingdom in northern Africa, which is really weird. The Vandals, a tribe of Germans called the Vandals, settled in northern Africa and started their own country there. That's not going to last long in our story, so don't get too attached. And then off in the east, despite the fact that that's kind of when the Rome, quote-unquote, fell, you still have, of course, the Eastern Roman Empire, what eventually becomes called the Byzantine Empire. And that is the center of our topic today. Our guy was a general for the Eastern Roman Empire. He was a Roman general. The Eastern Romans are in a bit of a tough spot at the moment because on pretty much every part of their borders, they're being attacked by someone or another. In the eastern part of the empire, out in Syria, like what's now the Middle East, the Persian Empire is a thing again, and under the Sassanid dynasty. So it's referred to in history as the Sassanid Persian Empire. They're constantly having like back and forths and border wars over different parts of Syria and Mesopotamia and up in like the Caucasus and stuff like that. On their northern border, up along the Danube River, they're getting a bunch of... there's still a lot of migrations going on. There's like Central Asian nomadic people, like the Avars, that are like the horseback steppe people, like the Huns. There's another group called the Avars that are coming down, and they're starting to like raid and stuff. You're starting to get like the first waves of Slavic migration into the Balkans at this point, and they're eventually going to take over the Balkans. All the Balkans are just Slavic now. Don't tell any Balkans I said that, because a lot of them will disagree that they're Slavic and will try to kill me in my sleep.
We got the Second Amendment.
And then on the west, you've got like this Cold War against several of these Germanic kingdoms that have occupied what used to be the Western Roman Empire. And it's a very weird situation, because we're kind of at a point. This is literally just a few years, like 20 years after the fall of the Western Empire. And there are a lot of people who haven't really accepted that the Western Empire has fallen yet, who live in these Germanic kingdoms. So a lot of the people who live there are like, yeah, we're still Romans. We live in the Roman Empire. The guys who rule over us might be Germans, but they're ruling on behalf of the emperor in Constantinople. So this is still technically the Roman Empire. That's the way a lot of these people thought. It's that sort of like transitionary period. It hadn't really settled in that Rome wasn't really a thing anymore.
Okay, damn.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's so interesting. And a big part that Belisarius plays in this whole process is he's kind of the guy who starts making people realize, oh, maybe Rome isn't a thing anymore. Maybe I'm not Roman anymore. Maybe this isn't like the empire that I'm living in. I mean, that's kind of what he's going to end up happening as a result of what he does. So that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in. And we introduce our character, Flavius Belisarius, in the year 500. Probably, we think.
Probably, we think?
Yeah, we don't know a lot about this guy before he joins the army. We're not even completely sure what town he was born in or where he grew up. Because old imperial records, some of them state he was from a town in what's now southern Bulgaria called Germania. And then others say that he was from a town in northern Greece called Romain, which they have very similar sounding names. It makes sense they were mixed up, but it makes it difficult for us because we don't know which one he was from. He was probably from the first one, though.
Okay.
He came from a background of... his ancestry was mostly either Illyrian or Thracian, so not necessarily like Roman, but he and his family were culturally Roman. And he grew up speaking Latin as his first language. It is very, very likely, we're not completely sure, but it's very likely that he was probably a peasant when he was born.
Okay.
He was probably born to a peasant family. We don't know any information about like his life growing up, what he was like as a kid, any of that kind of stuff. We don't even know his parents' names. We know that he joined the Roman Empire, or the Roman army, the Roman legions, at some point in his late teens. And that's when we start to get a little more information on him. Because while he was in the army, apparently he was so good at being a soldier that he was handpicked by the emperor of the Roman Empire in Constantinople. He was handpicked to come into Constantinople and form the emperor's bodyguard and command it.
Damn.
And so that is how he really enters history, is when he arrives in Constantinople and he forms the emperor's bodyguard. It was a unit called the Bucularii, I think it is how it's pronounced, which is Latin for biscuit eaters. And don't ask me, I have no idea why they're called that. But that's who they are. Maybe it had something to do with like they were all like rich, tidy sort of fucking assholes. The Bucularii, The Bucularii were basically they were a heavy cavalry unit, so they rode around on horses and the horses had armor on them, and they would charge into on the battlefield. They charge into formations with lances and swords and just break up infantry formations and stuff like that. So kind of think of them as like proto knights. That's kind of how they functioned, with the exception of the fact that they were also horseback archers as well. So they could either act as heavy infantry or as heavy cavalry, or also as like sort of. So Bucularii, basically think medieval knights mixed with like Hun Attila the Hun style horse archers. Basically what they were. Belisarius first kind of enters into prominence because he's now the guy in charge of the emperor's bodyguard. He's now like a high-ranking officer within the Roman army, and as a result, he ends up coming up in discussions about people to appoint as military commanders during all these different campaigns they're having to fight, because they're fighting everything. And so he eventually is appointed to command armies in the field. And so he gets sent out east to fight the Persians because they're having another one of their wars. And this is a one specific war called the Iberian War, which Iberia is... I'm not sure if it's Iberia or Iberia, because it's basically what's now the modern-day nation of Georgia in the Caucasus. And the Romans and the Persians were having a war over who got to have Georgia, basically. He was put in charge of the army in Iberia itself, while the bulk of the Roman forces were fighting the Persians in Syria. And his job was to raid and pillage and kill people in order to distract the part of the Persian army from going back down south and reinforcing the main part of the Persian army. And he did that pretty well, by all accounts. He did his job. He was still young, and so he did get into several battles. He got into 4 battles overall. Or maybe 3. The records are unclear. They don't know if one of those battles was actually just one battle with 2 different names, or was actually 2 different battles. It's one of those things. This is the kind of record keeping we're dealing with. It's called the Dark Ages. I don't know how to. We got to deal with it.
Yeah, I kind of figured it was some bullshit like that.
So yeah, he fought his first 4 major battles as a commander. He lost all of them, but he did his job well.
Sips, that's 4 sips.
Oh yeah, it is. So while he was out east in the year 527, the emperor at the time, who I promise this is actually his real name. His name was Emperor Justin. Because believe it or not, Justin is actually I think it's a biblical name, actually. I think it's from the Bible.
I wouldn't be surprised.
So while our guy, Mr. Belisarius, was off fighting Persians in Georgia, in the year 527, the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, Justin, died. And his adopted son / biological nephew, Justin's adopted son / biological nephew, Justinian, which I hate old ancient Greek naming conventions. Yeah, Justinian's a weird name. But Justinian the First, he comes to the throne in 527, and he knows Belisarius. They spent time together in the capital. He decides, Belisarius, you've lost every single battle you fought so far, but I think you've got what it takes. I'm going to put you in charge of all Roman forces in Syria, which is a pretty big promotion for a guy who was born a peasant.
Yeah?
Yeah, which makes sense because both Justin and Justinian were also born peasants, and they ended up becoming emperors. That's pretty interesting. So yeah, Belisarius, he gets all of the forces in Syria. He goes on to beat the ever-loving crap. Like, I can't emphasize enough how badly he beat the Persians.
This ass whooping was?
Yeah, it's a horrendous crime against humanity level ass whooping at the Battle of Dara. So what he did was he took a trick. One of the battles that he'd fought up in Georgia, he had lost because the Persian army had tricked him. And they had dug a bunch of really deep trenches in front of their lines, so that when Belisarius sent his men forward to go and attack the Persians, they all fell into the pits, and then they were all just stabbed to death. He lost like 1,000 guys that way. And so he took that trick, and he tried it on the Persians. But the Persians didn't fall for it, because they're like, hey, I know that trick. I did that to you. You know what my horsemen are going to do? Hey, guys, come over here. When you see that ditch over there, that really obvious out in the open ditch? Yeah, when you're charging these guys, just run around it. But here's the thing. Belisarius wasn't trying to trick them into thinking he's doing the same trick. He's trying to trick them into thinking.
So it was a subterfuge.
Yes. He tricked them into thinking he was doing the same trick when really he wanted them to think he was doing the same trick because he was actually doing something else. So when they ran around the ditches, they ran headfirst into a line of soldiers that were hidden behind a hill. And then they ran headfirst into these guys, and then another group that was hidden popped out behind them and then crushed them between the two lines. And the Persian army was just completely annihilated in the course of an afternoon.
Sounds like damn good. That's a damn good strategic planning for someone who's lost all of his prior battles.
Yeah, that's one of his big tricks. He has a lot of big tricks, but one of the most important ones is he's a pretty anxious guy. And he's really scared of making mistakes, and so he really, really tries to learn from his past failures. And it always serves him really well. And so, capitalizing on this, he starts to push further into Mesopotamia. Or, I'm sorry, they're still in Syria. Further into Syria, pushing what's left of the Persian forces out. And then, out of nowhere, a completely new, fresh Persian army made up of a bunch of Arab horsemen that had been hired as mercenaries. They come out of nowhere, and his scouts see them coming, and so he sets up at another place called Callinicum, the city of Callinicum, which actually that city still exists today. It's the city of Raqqa in Syria. But he sets up a defense at Callinicum, and he does beat the Persians at first. They try to attack his lines. He's able to outmaneuver them again. And then their army falls apart, and he orders all of his men forward to go and chase them down. And they start doing that, and they're doing pretty good until they reach the Persian army's camp. And when they reach the camp, all of these guys, which, by the way, this is on Easter Day. So all of these guys, very devout Christians, they've been fasting for the past 2 days. So they haven't eaten any food in the last 2 days.
I didn't know Easter was a fasting holiday in the past.
Good Friday and the Saturday before Easter are fasting days in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I didn't grow up with a lot of Catholic influence.
Yeah, it's something not a lot of people know. But so when they came across the camp, they had all of their food laid out.
Oh, I did. I just forget the two holidays are connected. I remember Good Friday.
Yeah, so these guys, they're chasing down the Persian troops, and then they come across the camp. They see all the food, and they're all starving because not only have they not eaten in 2 days, but they have just fought a battle, which is exhausting.
And also, aren't soldiers like almost notoriously fed normally anyway? Just because like the issues of like the complexities of delivering food out in the field?
Generally speaking, that's a fair thing to say. Yeah, it's really dependent on specific conditions, though. But as a general rule, yeah, soldiers don't eat the best out in the field. If they do get enough to eat, it's usually shit food. Most of the time, it's probably not as much as they'd like to eat. But also, like, armies kind of have a vested interest in making sure that their soldiers are well fed, because hungry soldiers don't fight as well. So, but yeah, like I said, all depends. So these guys, they come into the camp, they see all this food laid out practically for them, and they stop chasing down the Persians, and they just start chowing down. And then the Persians are given enough breathing room that they can reform. And then they launch a counterattack, and now all of these guys are broken up and distracted and out of formation, and have like put their weapons down and stuff like that because they're digging in. And they just get overrun in an instant by all of these cavalry. Just immediately overtake all of them, and they all break and they all run, and it's an awful, horrific defeat for the Romans. They snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, and it wasn't Belisarius' fault. He was put in a really...
That's still a loss, though, so sip.
Yeah, it is still a loss. So yeah, we're like 2 years into his career as a general, and he has 5 losses under his belt.
I don't know how he was able to keep going, to be honest, especially since he was a peasant, so he didn't have like the nobility benefit of the doubt. Oh, maybe he needs some time under his belt, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that's something that comes up a lot with, especially with Justinian, because Justinian has a really complicated relationship with Belisarius. He kind of hates the guy, but he keeps pulling his ass out of the fire, but then he also keeps screwing him over. It's really bizarre, but... No, that's just like regular Roman general stuff. Like, yeah, that part and parcel of fighting the Persians is eventually you're going to die in the sands of Syria at some point. But yeah, so he and his crippled army are forced to retreat, and that kind of caused the entire Roman front to collapse in Syria. And it really looked like just the entire region was going to get completely overrun by the Persians. And then conveniently, the king of Persia died. And the new king of Persia, this fucking amazing guy. So just a real life just...
Giga Chad?
Oh, the most giga of all Chads that has ever lived. What a good, insane guy. I am almost certainly going to do an episode on this guy at some point. This guy named Khosrow. Because from the moment that he became the king of Persia, he dedicated his entire life to trolling the Romans at every single... To give you a little preview, at one point in a later war that he fights against the Romans, he's going to invade Syria, and his army is going to make it as far as the city of Antioch, which is one of the holiest cities in all of Christianity. And he is going to sack the city of Antioch, and he's going to burn it down, and he's going to kidnap every single civilian from Antioch, and then drag them all the way back to Persia. And when they arrive in Persia, he gets all of his best architects and engineers together, and they build a 1-to-1 exact perfect replica of the city of Antioch in the middle of Persia.
The fuck?
Down to the trees. Every single brick practically is exactly the same. Every single person that he kidnapped were able to go back to their homes because now their homes were in the exact same place. And then I forgot what the name was in Persian, but the name he gave to this new city he built translated as Khosrow's Better Antioch.
That's just like a fuck you moment.
This is a real story. This actually happened.
I'll drink to that, brother.
Hell yeah. Anyways, this is not a Khosrow episode as much as I would love it to be. But the first thing Khosrow does is he takes advantage of Persia's good setup here. He's kind of got the Romans by the balls, and because he's such a new king, his position is very unstable and uncertain, and so he doesn't want to risk getting overthrown right after he's come to the throne by continuing to fight a war. And so he goes ahead and makes peace with the Romans with some pretty drastic land concessions, including getting Georgia, Iberia, what it was called at the time, and also a bunch of a big chunk of Syria, which isn't great, especially for Justinian, because he's just come to the throne himself, and having the first thing happen after you've come to the throne is lose a war pretty badly is not great. Justinian wanted some answers, and he wanted somebody to blame for this catastrophe, and so he screwed over Belisarius.
Sounds about right. So we got it shot.
Yes, we do have a shot. Prost.
Cheers.
So he recalls Belisarius to Constantinople, and he puts him on trial for, losing, which, to be completely fair, he did lose.
That's also a sip, technically.
I guess so. I meant it for battle. Yeah, why not?
I'm just being a douche.
So he gets recalled. He gets put on trial. And Justinian's... This is where I'll go ahead and introduce Justinian's wife, because she is just as important as Justinian, if not more important. Her name is Theodora. And she is one of the most powerful women who have ever lived, both in terms of actual political power and just her personal willpower. She was an incredible woman, an amazing woman. I'm not going to say she was a good person, but she was an incredible woman. But she is basically she's basically the co-ruler with Justinian. She doesn't just take the passive wife approach to being empress. She makes a constant effort to be a strong advisor to Justinian when he's doing his stuff. And she has a lot of her own sort of backdoor soft power herself. She has a lot of connections, and she was very charismatic and had a lot of very good friends and confidants, and she knew how to maneuver in the seedy back rooms of Byzantine politics. And she was really fucking good at it.
Okay. And
in all honesty, if it were not for Theodora, Justinian probably would not have become Justinian the Great. She is the great in Justinian the Great. She is what made it possible.
She really puts the adage behind every great man is a greater woman.
Yeah, she is the living embodiment of that saying. She fucking hated Belisarius. From the beginning, just hated the shit out of this guy. If it weren't for Theodora, Justinian would probably have liked Belisarius and cooperated with him a lot more. But Theodora just hated the guy because from the very beginning, she was really good at picking up on signs of potential for political advancement and for potential for treachery. And she always viewed Belisarius as a threat to Justinian's rule. Which, to be fair, she was kind of right on the money with that.
Oh, does he stab the emperor in the back or something?
Nope, he remains loyal to the day he dies despite all of the shit that Justinian puts him through. But he is presented with many opportunities to do so.
Damn.
That's another thing, is Justinian, or Belisarius, loyal guy, not a dishonest bone in his body. He's kind of forced to become this political operator and do all the same sleazy, schemy shit that everybody else is in this system, and he hates every minute of it. And he's kind of bad at it too. And the only real reason he ever retains any power is because he's so fucking good at his job. And I'll explain all of this in
due time.
Another thing with Theodora, when you look up a lot of information about Theodora, her name gets dragged through the mud a whole lot. Not all of it is unjustified, but she gets more shit than she really deserves. Because a lot of the information that we have from her comes from one single guy. And that guy is rule number 2, Procopius. So,
okay, 3 sips.
And Procopius was, he was a historian. He wrote a lot of history. He lived during this time. But before he was a historian, he was the official military scribe in the office of Belisarius. So he was the guy who did all of Belisarius' paperwork. And then he would later go on and write a bunch of histories about all of the figures during this time. And he's like the main primary source that we have for most of these people, including Belisarius and Theodora. And one of the most important works that he wrote was the Secret Histories, which is it was a sequel to the other histories that he wrote that were published. They were released to the public. But this one was kept secret because if it had gotten out, he probably would have had his head removed.
I was literally just about to say he would be beheaded.
Yeah, it was about 20 or 30, I can't remember for sure. I just got done reading it, and I can't even remember for sure. But it was like 20 or 30 chapters long of just slandering and shit-talking every single important person in the Roman Empire during his lifetime. Most especially, he focused on Belisarius and his wife, and Justinian and Theodora. He just spent 200 or so pages just shit-talking them in every possible way he possibly could. And it's important because it provides a lot of insight into kind of the personal stuff and that was going on in their personal lives during this time. But it's so heavily biased, it's really difficult to rely on it as a source. But it's kind of all we got. So we're kind of forced to.
It's a rock in a hard place kind of situation.
Yeah, we're not entirely sure what all from the Secret Histories is true and what all is exaggerated and what all is just an outright lie. We can make assumptions, but we can never be sure. Anyways, so yeah, Theodora is kind of talking into Justinian's ear and being like, hey, maybe this guy isn't all that great. Maybe he's not all he's cracked up to be as a commander. Maybe he should, face some consequences for losing us this war. And Justinian's like, kind of, I don't want to say this because this is more of the bullshit that Procopius wrote about in his Secret Histories, but he is kind of pussy whipped. He's kind of like, yeah, okay. And so he brings Belisarius to Constantinople, puts him on trial for incompetence. There's a good possibility that he could be jailed if he is found guilty of incompetence on this scale. But he makes a convincing argument because he explains what happened at the Battle of Callinicum and explains that, well, I didn't intend to fight the battle on Easter Day right after all of my guys had fasted for 2 days. I wanted to put it off until a couple days later, but all of my men were so invigorated with religious fervor at the holiday that they really, really wanted to get out there and kill some Persians. And they said that if they didn't, they were going to mutiny. They were just going to go off and they were going to do it themselves. And so I had to. My hand was forced. And that was actually a pretty convincing argument to Justinian. And he was like, okay, that makes sense. You're free to go. Keep looking in your mailbox for your next assignment. So that's how he sort of evades consequences for the first time. But for Belisarius, that defeat at Callinicum is going to haunt him until the day he dies. He is never going to forget it. It's going to be every single time he's ever going into battle, he's thinking about Callinicum. and what he has to do to prevent that from ever happening again. So while he is back in Constantinople, we have a little kerfuffle that happens in the year 532. It's a little...
What happens in 532?
So, here, I'll give some background real quick. So, Justinian, one of the big things that he's known for, one of the things that made him the Great, were his legal reforms. He's described as being the only Roman emperor to do a complete, absolute overhaul of the entire Roman legal system. And that is exactly what he did. But that's not quite all of it. What he did was...
More than that?
Yeah, that would have been monumental on its own. What he did was take it a step further. He invented the idea of civil law.
He did?
He invented civil law from scratch.
From scratch?
That was his brainchild, was the concept of civil law, which, remember what I said earlier, here in the United States today, we are affected by the stuff that he did over 1,500 years ago.
Yeah, I remember.
The United States legal system is based on civil law, which was invented by Justinian.
I don't know if I should thank the guy or hate the guy.
It is what it is. But it's... So basically what he did was he and the guys that he hired to implement all of these reforms, what they did was they took all of the written Roman law that had been passed, that they had records of, going all the way back to the founding of the city of Rome. All the laws they had records for. They compiled all of them together, and then they read through each one of them individually. All of the ones that were relevant and that they wanted to keep, they set on one side. All of the ones that were no longer relevant or they didn't want to keep, they threw in the trash. And then they organized all the ones that they did want to keep, and they compiled them into a clearly written, well-organized, indexed, published work.
Like we need to do for our tax laws. America!
Yeah, kind of. What he did here basically was a proto-constitution.
Damn.
It was the closest that we get to something resembling a constitution prior to, like, the Magna Carta.
The Magna Carta wasn't even close to a constitution, though, was it?
Oh, God, that's so fucking complicated. It was a declaration of the rights of property owners in England, and an explanation of the limitations of the king on his authority over those property rights. Is basically what the Magna Carta was, which in itself is a framework for how...
Wouldn't it be more like the Declaration of Independence then?
Yes, that is actually what I'm getting to. Because the second part of what Justinian did was he had a bunch of jurists and legal scholars and experts come in and review all of his laws and write annotations and explanations and considerations on all of these different, every single law, and then had all of those writings and all of those annotations and stuff all written down and bound and published. And so the closest direct resemblance that you can find to this ever happening at any other point in history is in regards to the U.S. Constitution, that being the first part of his work, and the Federalist Papers, that being the second part of his work.
Damn.
We literally did the exact same thing here in the United States. We wrote a constitution, an outline of the framework of all of our laws, or at least like the way that our laws should be structured. And then a bunch of guys came together and they wrote down all of their thoughts and all of their interpretations on how those laws should work and be applied, and then collected them all into a one big document and then published that alongside it. That is the U.S. Constitution and the Federalist Papers. We did the exact same thing. And that wasn't a mistake. The guys who did the Federalist Papers knew of Justinian. They had read Justinian.
They were doing it because they saw how well it worked for him, and they were like,
right,
let's use that blueprint.
Yeah, exactly. We are living in a system that Justinian kind of more or less invented right now.
Okay. Damn.
I knew about that kind of in the abstract, but when I actually was reading about it and like reading into the details, like how similar it fucking blew my mind.
It didn't hit you how directly we copied it until you actually looked into it.
Right, yeah. The Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. has, in the veranda, they have portraits of all of the major legal thinkers that have contributed to influencing what eventually became the American legal system. And one of those portraits is Justinian.
I didn't know that was a thing, to be perfectly honest.
So yeah, that was a pretty important thing. But at this point in Justinian's reign, it's still pretty early on. It's kind of slow going. It's not being implemented super quickly because, these things take a lot of time to, do all the paperwork for it.
Oh, definitely.
And it was going even slower because the guys that Justinian had actually implementing these things were crazy corrupt. Just the most corrupt people that have ever lived. So from the perspective of the people of the empire, their taxes kept getting higher. And okay, see if this sounds familiar when I say this. Their taxes kept getting higher.
But they didn't see any of the benefits?
The civil service that was providing all of their social services kept getting its budget cut.
Yay! America 2.0. Well, America's prototype.
It is so bizarre how similar the Byzantine Empire was to the United States the more that you look into it.
Especially when it's probably the stupid, like, oh my god, on the nose similarities are unintentional.
Yeah, so that paired with, the recent defeat to Persia, Justinian was pretty unpopular at this point.
I would have never guessed, Eric.
Yeah, both with regular everyday people and with all of the rich people in Constantinople who had a few different reasons to hate him. Not just like all of the reforms were kind of hated. They were all conservative. They didn't really like these legal reforms. They were all rich, so they were the ones getting hit hardest with all of these taxes, which is one pretty major difference between the Byzantine Empire and the United States. When our taxes go up in the United States, they don't affect rich people at all. And then also because Justinian and Theodora were both lowborn. They weren't born into nobility, and so they kind of looked down on them and didn't like that he had imperial power. Yeah, I forgot to mention Theodora, before she married Justinian, she was an actress.
They had actors back then?
Yeah, they had
I would have thought they were like theater performers and such.
Yeah, that's what she was. It's always described that she was an actress, but that's what she did. She was a theater performer. She did plays and dramas and things like that for people. People would pay they'd pay it, throw a shilling on the table and walk in and see a bunch of these people perform.
What kind of show? What kind of stuff would she perform?
A lot of it would be like religious plays, like depictions of different events in the Bible and stuff like that. Some of them were like old Greek stuff, like the stuff that the plays that they had in like classical Greece. So yeah, stuff like that. Actresses and actors were considered the scum of the earth. They were the lowest of the lowest of the low of gutter trash in Byzantine society. Because, especially with the women, if you were an actress, that also meant you were a prostitute.
How?
Almost 100% of the time. Because the way that it worked is that guys would come in and they'd sit down and they'd watch a play, and one of the actresses that would be performing would catch his eye, and she would charm him with her stage performance, and he would become very motivated to track her down after the show. And
so it was like a strip performance.
They weren't like... These weren't like erotic plays. There wasn't like stripping or any like nudity or anything. They were just regular normal plays. But guys would show up and they'd think, hey, that one's pretty hot. And then they'd go find them after the show, throw a few bucks at them, and, go do the deed. And it made actresses a lot of money. It was actually pretty lucrative for them, even though they were they were reviled as like the scum of the earth. They were pretty comfortable, like comparatively comfortable, because they made a lot of money off of that.
So what you're saying is sex work has always been stigmatized, unfortunately?
Oh yeah, always, since day one. And that is the background that Theodora came from. And now she is the Empress, which had a lot of people really pissed off. And then on top of all of that, you also had one like really bizarre issue going on in Constantinople itself that was making Justinian very unpopular. Do you remember when we did the episode on Attila the Hun? We talked about when that one time Constantinople had an earthquake.
Vaguely, yes.
Yeah, all of the walls around Constantinople got knocked down in this earthquake, and they had to get all of those walls rebuilt before Attila came with his army to come sack the city.
Now I remember exactly now, yes.
Yeah. Do you remember how they got them rebuilt so fast?
No, I do not.
They got all of the chariot fan clubs and had them compete against one another to build their sections of the wall as fast as they could, and then every day they'd give an award to whichever team built faster. And these teams hated each other so much that losing wasn't an option, and so they were able to rebuild the entirety of like these 11-mile long walls in less than 2 months. Yeah, so those teams, or those chariot fan clubs, those chariot racing fan clubs, they still exist at this point. It's like 150 years later. They still exist. They're still around. And they're still just as fucking weird. Probably more weird than they were back then. Because if you remember, I explained that these things weren't just fan clubs. They were a mix of like hooligan sports fan clubs mixed with street gangs, mixed with political action committees.
I vaguely remember you talking about how they were a weird mishmash.
Yeah. They are called in Greek. They were called demos. When it's anglicized, we just call them in English the demes. And these demes, there were 4 of them. One for the blue team, the green team, the red team, and the white team, with the blue and green being the biggest ones. And Justinian was a big fan of the blue team, and the blue deme were his guys in the streets. Whenever he needed some skulls cracked against some of his political opponents, he'd go send the blues out. All of the rich noblemen and the senators in Constantinople, all the conservative ones who hated Justinian's guts, they all liked the greens. And so the green deme, the deme for the greens, were their guys on the street who went out cracking skulls. And in these years since Justinian has come to power, these 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot of street violence between the demes. It's been getting to like a fever pitch because all of the senators are getting pissed off at all their taxes going up, and are trying to get back at Justinian on the streets. And so, for some godforsaken reason, Justinian comes up with the bright idea, hey, how about the reasonable politically savvy thing would be to put all the blame for the violence on the Greens and then go and crack down on them.
He didn't though, did he?
What he does instead is he cracks down on all of the Demes, including his own, the Blues, which then turns the Blues against him. And then the Blues and the Greens start working together for all of the senators who hate Justinian. And so they start talking. They're out in the streets. They're talking to people, those regular everyday people. And they start planning. They start coming up with some new chants to do at the races. And so one day in January of 532, everybody's coming out for the races. And at one end of the track, the emperor has a box seat, which is the hippodrome where the races are held is right next to his palace. So he can literally just come out onto a box seat in his palace and watch the races.
That's kind of dope as, bullshit is.
That's dope as fuck. That's rich people fuck off money.
It is.
So yeah, he comes out expecting to see a regular atmosphere, go watch the races, have some fun, go wave at his people, the regular normal emperor stuff. He comes out expecting to hear the regular chants where something they'll do before the races start is everybody in the crowd will start chanting for their own team that they like. And so all of the people, all of the Blues will be chanting blue, 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 and all the Greens will be chanting green, green, green. And they'll try to out-chant each other. They'll try to get louder than one another. It's great. It's a typical sports stuff. It's really fun. I love that shit. He comes out, and instead of chanting, they all start hurling insults at him. Everybody in the crowd is booing him and yelling at him and calling him an idiot. And
it's a you done fucked up Aaron moment.
Yeah, he's when he comes out, he's kind of starting to realize, oh, this is a little volatile. And then they do start chanting. But they're not chanting over one another. They're all chanting in unison. They're all chanting the exact same thing. One single word. The Greek word Nika, which is the Greek word that translates into English as victory. Nika, 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 Nika. And more people come in, and more and more people are joining in the chant. It's getting louder. It's getting louder, and it's getting louder, and everybody's getting more excited. There's just this wave of excitement and anger and righteous fury just sweeping over the crowd. And all of a sudden, people start climbing out of the stands and running out onto the track, just chanting and screaming and yelling at the emperor and telling him off. And eventually, all the people are just pouring out onto the track, and then they start pouring out of the hippodrome, and then they start burning shit.
Arson's always an option.
Arson is always an option. It is always morally correct. They just start burning everything. It is a full-blown riot. There are very few riots that have ever been this fucking big. This is 20% of the entire population of the city burning everything they can see.
Fuck.
There's so many fucking people, and this riot is enormous. There's so many people out in the streets, and they're all getting egged on by the Demes. The Demes are out, and they're organizing the rioters to be more rioty, and it gets bad. It gets really bad. A big group of them surround his palace, and they trap him inside. Trap Justinian inside. And he gets scared shitless.
No duh.
And he's stuck in here for a few days. In total, this riot lasts for 5 days. And at one point, Justinian seriously considered, he makes up his mind. He's like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. We have a secret passage out the back of the palace that leads right into the strait, out into the water, and I could just hop on a ship and I could leave.
He was just gonna run away like a little bitch.
Yeah, he was going to do it. He had his bags packed. He had all of his assistants and his slaves ready, all packed up, ready to go. And then Theodora steps in front of him. He's like, no, the fuck you're not. You are not fucking leaving this throne. You are staying put right where you are. I would rather be dead than be anything but the Empress. I will either be the Empress or I will be dead. I will accept nothing else. You are going to sit your ass down right here in this palace, and you are going to call somebody, anybody, and get this shit squared away. Because I'm not giving up my throne. And so Justinian's like, okay. And so his panic, his wife's nagging bolsters his spirits. I felt dirty just saying that. He calms himself and he regains his senses, and his really brilliant. He's a genuinely brilliant guy. All evidence to the contrary. He is a genuinely intelligent guy, and his brain starts working, and he realizes, wait, what if I just start throwing money at people? And so that's exactly what he does.
He took the capitalism approach. Throw money at it till it goes away. Right,
yeah. And so he secretly sends an envoy to talk with the leaders of the Blues, and he bribes them all to get them to stop rioting. And so all of the Blues supporters kind of drift off into the background. They all go home and kind of just watch the fire blazing from the kitchen windows. And after he's accomplished that, he shoots off a letter to who else but our guy, Flavius Belisarius.
Yay.
And he says, look, dude, I know you've got some beef with me. I kind of accused you of being a coward and a traitor because you lost that battle out at Callinicum. But you think you could do me a solid here? I promise I'll pay you back for it. And so Belisarius is like, I am a loyal soldier. I will do this as I am ordered to. And so he comes with about 40,000 fucking soldiers.
He comes armed to the nines.
Armed to the fucking nines. And he comes into the city. And at this point, it's 5 days into the... I think this is January 15th of 532. He comes into the city. And interestingly, the riots have kind of quieted down. They aren't burning as much stuff right now. Because all of the rioters are, at that moment, all assembled in...
Can I real quick make a joke?
Yeah.
Would have been perfect if it was January 3rd.
Why?
The insurrection.
January 6th?
I thought it was 3rd, but yeah.
It's the 6th.
It was the same day as the insurrection. It would have been hilarious.
It actually would be hilarious because what all the rioters were doing was they were all assembled in the Hippodrome, and they were proclaiming a new emperor. They found a different guy that they wanted to be
So it would have been literally the exact same thing.
It would have been literally the exact same thing, yes.
Well, I think probably a little bit more justified on their end rather than Trump's end.
Yeah, I could agree with that. Also, it ended a lot better for all of the January 6th guys than it does for these guys, because...
Oof.
I don't know if you know this, but sports stadiums, they have very narrow, constricted exits.
It's a choke point.
It is a choke point. So what Belisarius did was all these rioters that were in the Hippodrome, he set up a bunch of guys at all of the exits and blocked all of the exits off. And then the Hippodrome is actually open on both the long track. You've got the long track, and then at the far end of each end of the track, you have that it's all open, so people can just kind of walk in. It's not like gated off or anything. It's just open. And so what he does is he takes all of his troops and he has them all line up at these two ends of the track. And all of the entrances in the stands themselves are all cut off by his other troops that are blocking them. And so you've got two walls of guys with spears and swords. And then he orders them to march forward. And so they both start going forward into the Hippodrome. As they're moving forward, they are stabbing the shit out of every single person that they come across.
Sounds about right.
And they just slowly move forward, closer and closer and closer, until all of the people that are there are packed in like sardines, and they start to panic. But they can't do anything about it. Some of them try to get out through the exits, but again, they are blocked. And so anybody who tries to go out the exits, they get stabbed to shit. And so they just, over the course of like 2 hours, just slowly closing in on them, stabbing in everybody, and just letting them fall down and then just climbing over their bodies and keep moving forward. By the time they get to the center, the people in the middle, the soldiers realize the bodies that they're stabbing now are already dead because they were crushed by the massive humanity that were being pressed into each other. And they had no room to fall because they were packed in so tightly. And so it's just hundreds of just dead bodies standing upright, propping each other up. And so within the course of about 2 hours, somewhere between 30 and 60,000 people have been murdered.
Yeah, way too many people.
In 2 hours, between 10 and 15% of the entire population of the largest city in the entire continent have been killed on an area of ground the size of a soccer field.
They were just like, fuck it, they die.
This is genuinely one of the most upsetting things I have ever read about on this show. Is thinking about the scale of the human suffering of this event. Fuck. Anyways, 30,000 people minimum now dead. All of the Deems, except for the Blues, they're all dead.
Except for our Emperor's team are dead.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
And not to mention that over the course of the 5 days of rioting, half of the city burned down.
Well, no shit.
That's not an exaggeration. Half of all of the standing buildings in the city of Constantinople no longer existed. 50%.
I assumed with rioting there would have been buildings gone, so does not surprise me.
Yeah, so Justinian's position, pretty safe now. No immediate threats to his power anymore. They've all been pretty well taken care of. Any senator who's still alive and still hates him aren't talking about it anymore. And Belisarius is once again back on Justinian's good side, so that's good for him. And also, all of the newly opened up real estate all through the city gave Justinian the opening that he needs to start on his next big project that he's now famous for, which is building all of these giant fuck-off buildings in Constantinople, including the Hagia Sophia, which is that giant domed church that if you ever look at have you ever seen pictures of Istanbul today, the city of Istanbul?
Not really.
Okay, if you ever look at a picture of Istanbul, just the skyline, you will see the Hagia Sophia. It sticks out like a sore thumb. It is massive. It's got a giant dome on it. These riots open up enough real estate that Justinian's able to build this giant church that he really wanted to build. And that's now pretty much what he's most famous for now. Is if anybody knows anything about Justinian, they know, yeah, he's the guy who built the giant church in Constantinople, in Istanbul. And now it's a mosque, obviously, because now it's Turkey, but it started off as a church. To this day, one of the largest religious buildings on the planet. Yeah. So I don't have a good way to close out this whole event was called the Nika riots. That's what it's known as now. I don't have a good way to close it out other than to say, not too long after the Nika riots, Belisarius got married.
Just top off all that murder with marriage. Lovely, brother.
Yeah. And that's how I'll introduce our last big... we've got 4 main characters in the story, basically. We've got Belisarius, Justinian, Theodora. Now here's number 4, Antonina, his wife. Antonina was also an actress. And Antonina is also best friends with Theodora, which makes it awkward because Theodora hates Belisarius. That's gonna keep up with that is gonna cause some problems in the future. Along with Antonina had been previously married, and she had one son from that marriage, a guy named Photius. So Photius becomes Belisarius' stepson. And also she had a bunch of kids from before she was married the first time, because, again, she was an actress. She got pregnant a lot. Theodora probably also had a bunch of kids from before she was empress that we don't know about.
Yay, obfuscation of history.
Yeah, it do what it do. I kind of bounced around the Secret Histories when I was reading it, so I'm sure it came up somewhere talking about Theodora. But oh yeah, is that 3 sips?
You mentioned it offhand, but we can count it.
Neato. Okay, so I'm about to make a joke that is probably going to like genuinely, like not even joking, like genuinely offend a lot of people. So after Belisarius dealt with the Nika riots by taking the Israeli occupation forces approach to a military conquest.
Ooh, that's rude, but it's factual. I hate to say.
Yeah. We get to the next period in his life, because now he's back on the Emperor's good side, and the Emperor is really keen to give him like a really nice, good sort of it's definitely not going to be a cushy job, but it's going to be very lucrative. So, like I mentioned at the start of the episode, North Africa had been conquered by the Vandals from the Roman Empire back in 435. And the Vandals, they were a Germanic people. They originated from what is now modern day like Eastern Germany. Fun fact, the Vandal Kingdom, these guys, the Vandals, is where we get the word vandalism from.
Really? I thought that would have been too easy.
The term vandalism, their name first became synonymous with destroying property, after they sacked Rome in like the 460s. And it left such an indelible scar on the collective psyche of Western civilization that to this day we still associate their name with the destruction of property. So yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yay, small history lesson. Within a history lesson.
Within a much larger history lesson. So the Vandals were... Okay, going back to another prior episode we've done. Do you remember when Santa Claus punched a guy at the Council of Nicaea?
Yes.
Yeah. The guy he punched, Arian, the branch of Christianity that he founded, which was considered a heresy by the rest of the Nicene Church, the Vandals are all Arians. They're all Arians. They practice that form of Christianity. And so they're all considered heretics by all of the Romans. So they are heretics, but like in terms of like geopolitics, at this point, the Vandals are technically allied with the Romans because this guy Hilderic he actually grew up in Constantinople. Hilderic is the king of the Vandals, and he grew up as once again we have like another one of these situations. He was a political prisoner as a child.
That seems to happen a lot throughout history.
It happens so fucking. It's so weird how often it happened. So he actually grew up in Constantinople, and he grew up alongside Justinian. They were childhood friends. And so when Hilderic grew up, he was pretty pro-Roman because he learned a lot about like Roman stuff. And so even though he was technically a filthy heretic, he was on paper an ally of the Romans. But then in 533, he got overthrown and arrested by his cousin Gelimer. And Gelimer took the throne. Or, I'm sorry, back in 530, that's when it happened. And so, after Gelimer came to the throne, he started oppressing all of the Romans. Because, again, this is a former, like, part of the Roman Empire. Most of the people who live in Northern Africa are Romans. They speak Latin. They practice Nicene Christianity. They view the Vandals as foreign occupiers with a heretic religion. And Gelimer considers them heretics right back, and so he starts oppressing them. He starts forcibly converting their churches to Arian churches. He starts confiscating land from Roman nobility and giving it to his own guys. Anywhere that they discover Nicene Christians practicing their masses, like in secret, he has them all killed. So, like, real, actual, like, full-on religious persecution going on.
I was about to say, sounds like they're checking all the boxes on religious persecution.
Yeah. And so Justinian is looking at this, and he doesn't really give a shit about the religious persecution, because, politics. But he does care about the fact that he doesn't want a Vandal kingdom that's hostile to him, because that's bad for their strategic position, because they want to keep the war front in the Mediterranean closed so they can focus all their forces on all of the other fronts that they have that are currently hot. And so he decides that Belisarius is the best guy to go ahead and solve this little issue. And so he names Belisarius Magister Militum, which is basically the highest ranking guy in the entire Byzantine military. And he gives him an army of 17,000 soldiers and 500 ships to take him to North Africa. And he says, go get our guy Hilderic out of prison and get rid of this Gelimer guy. And Belisarius is like, sure thing, boss. And hops his happy ass on a ship alongside his new wife, Antonina, and also his godson, this guy named Theodosius.
Godchildren was a thing back then?
Oh, yeah.
Into the point where you just went off on what was probably months, if not longer, trip away with them?
Here's the weird thing. So Theodosius at this point, he's in his 20s. So it's not like he's like a little kid or anything. And he is actually like a military officer, and so he was brought.
Oh, so it was more like his godchild, who was also one of his commanders, I guess?
Kind of, yeah. But he didn't really have to come along. The reason he's coming along is because Antonina wanted him to come along.
Why did Antonina want him to come along?
Because she really wants to fuck him.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah. And Belisarius does not know yet. So yeah, they set their happy asses off onto the high seas, and they arrive in northern Africa. They land about 160 miles down the coast from the capital of the Vandal kingdom, the city of Carthage. And as soon as a Roman soldier sets foot on the beach,
shit goes whack.
Well, yeah, it does go whack, because as soon as word reaches Gelimer that there is a Roman army on his territory, he panics and freaks the fuck out, and he's like, oh shit, we have to kill everybody. And so the first thing he does is he goes and he kills Hilderic.
Oh, good God.
And so the first thing that Belisarius is finding out when he arrives there is the whole reason for them being there in the first place, Hilderic,
is now moot.
That is now a moot point. And so he's just sitting there with his thumb up his ass like, okay, so what the fuck do we do now? He starts thinking about it. And he's like,
my first thought would be, okay, I have to avenge this person. I was sent here all the way. I can't come without some kind of good news, quote unquote,
Yeah, he doesn't care about vengeance because this is all politics.
Well, I know he wouldn't personally care, but like in place of my commander, like who cared about this person or whatever.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, the reason he's there is because they can't have Gelimer on the throne, because he's hostile to the Romans, and they can't have a hostile power in the Mediterranean because that's bad for their strategic position. but they don't have anybody else to put on the throne. And so Belisarius decides, of his own accord, let's just go ahead and get rid of the Vandals. We don't...
So he goes full genocide?
Well, he doesn't genocide them, but he's also not going to let them have their own country anymore. And he's just going to annex the whole thing. He's just going to annex it all into the Roman Empire.
Fuck it. We ball.
Yeah, fuck it. What? Yeah, we ball.
I can't imagine how cringy this is to like an actual historian. It's like, no, don't say that.
Yeah, he did a little oopsie whoopsie and killed 60,000 people.
Oopsie whoopsie, I made a fucky wucky.
A little fuck a boingo. Yeah. Also, I forgot to mention, Belisarius' second in command is also his best friend. It's this guy named John the Armenian.
He's just, his most defining trait is he's Armenian, huh?
He's not actually Armenian.
The fuck?
It's because he used to be the military. He used to be the Roman governor of Armenia. That's why he's called John the Armenian. But yeah, his name is just John. I guess in Greek it'd be Ioannis. That'd be his name, which sounds a lot better than John, but he's John. But yeah, he's Belisarius' best friend. He's also second in command on this expedition. He's not going to be around very long, so buckle up.
Don't worry about him too much.
Yeah. Most of the reason why I'm mentioning him is because...
the way he dies?
Yeah, it's just really fucking sad. Anyways, so, yeah, Hilderic's dead. And Gelimer, he's looking at the position of the Roman army, and he's like, okay, they're going to come up this road, and they're going to be coming straight for Carthage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up all of my forces at this little valley right here and hide them all over the hills. So once they pass through this valley down the road heading to Carthage, I can ambush them. And I can try to wipe them out. Because technically he does have more soldiers. Not by a lot. Belisarius has 17,000. Gelimer has 20,000. But in terms of an ambush, that's a pretty big difference. That'll be important. And he decides, I'm going to do it at this spot right here at a place called Ad Decimum. And Ad Decimum, that is two words, ad, A-D, and then decimum.
That sounds like it'd be a Yu-Gi-Oh term.
Yeah.
It's not your Escher deck, it's your Ad Decium.
Actually, now that I think about it, it might not actually be a place. Now that I think about it. Because ad decimum is a term used to describe a 10-mile marker on a Roman highway. So it's like at the fourth ad decimum outside of Carthage, which is the 40th mile marker. Anyways, not important. So Belisarius, because of the trauma from losing the Battle of Callinicum, it's still on his mind. He's really paranoid about the discipline of his troops. And so he starts to get pretty cruel with them. He enforces really strict rules on them about interacting with the locals. He has two of his soldiers executed because they picked a couple of fruit from a tree in an orchard.
He executed his own men for picking fruit.
Yeah, because they didn't own those trees. They were stealing from the guy who owned that orchard.
Wasn't the guy part of the enemy, though?
No, all of these people are Romans. They're just ruled by Vandals. And so it works because all of the Romans that they come across are like, wow, these soldiers, they're so well behaved. They're not here to conquer us. They're here to liberate us. And so all the Romans who already understandably hate the Vandals because, they're being oppressed for their religion. Any apprehension they have about Belisarius and his army, is taken away by just how well behaved all of the soldiers are. They're not looting. They're not pillaging. They're not going into anybody's homes and stealing shit. They just come through. They behave themselves. They pay for all of the stuff that they get. And so
that's why he did that.
Yeah, it works. they conquer most of North Africa not by fighting, but just by being nice. And people are like, cool, sounds great, I'll join you. But his strictness ends up making his soldiers hate him. And that's not going to be the only reason they hate him. It's going to get pretty bad. So yeah, as they're moving up, all of these Roman settlements in the Vandal Kingdom are just immediately like opening their doors and welcoming Belisarius and his army, and so they're making pretty good headway. And they eventually make it to Ad Decimum, and just before Ad Decimum, Belisarius notices that hey, that looks like a valley. Those look like hills on the side. Looks like a pretty good place for an ambush. I'm going to go check it out myself. And so he gets a bunch of his bucolarii, the biscuit eaters, and gets a bunch of them assembled together. And they go forward and they start scouting. And they're gone for a few hours and they don't really see anything. They look around. They don't find an army anywhere. And so they're like, oh, okay. Would have expected an army there. Good to know. We're making pretty good progress. I'm glad we're not going to be getting anything bad happening to us. And then they head back, and they show up just in time to see the entire rest of the army running for their lives, because the rest of the Roman army was actually ambushed while Belisarius was away. And then so they show back up, and Belisarius, he immediately jumps into he starts gathering them all up, like, hey, what the fuck are you doing? Get back into line, get back into formation. And so he manages to get them to stop running. They start forming back up. And then he goes out and he starts scouting, and he finds he's expecting the Vandal army to have already run, because that's kind of how ambushes work, is you hit them hard, you get them to scatter, and then you run away before they can regroup. But when his scouts come back, they say, yeah, they're still in the exact same place. We don't know why. They haven't gone anywhere. They're just hanging out. And they don't know why at the time, but as it turns out, Gelimer was on the battlefield, and while they were fighting, even though they won at first, Gelimer saw his brother Amatus get killed. His brother died in the fighting, and he was completely distraught. He was beside himself. He was sobbing his eyes out and refusing to give orders or anything. And he demanded that before they go anywhere, that they have to stay and they have to bury Amatus. We have to give him a full burial and a Christian funeral before we go anywhere. I can't leave him like this.
Sounds like the kind of BS that happened back then.
Yeah.
Give me a funeral pyre and move on if we're in the middle of something like that, Derek. If the apocalypse happens, just funeral pyre me and call it good.
Well, even in this situation, even a funeral pyre would take too long. Just leave the fucking body. But he doesn't. And instead, they stay behind and they give him a full Christian funeral. And they start to bury him. And in the middle of letting him down in his grave, all of a sudden, the Romans that they just fought off reappear over the hill and charge down and slaughter most of them.
So is this another loss for him?
No, this is a win for Belisarius.
Oh, okay.
And they crush the Vandals, and the Vandals run away. Their army just completely shattered and scattered to the wind. It's a pretty decisive defeat. And so he's Gelimer. He runs off. He hides out. He finds a place to hide out, and he's able to get some of his forces back together. He's able to cobble together something resembling an army again, but it takes him a while. And in the meantime, the Romans just walk right into Carthage without any issue at all. And then. So that at this point, the conquest of North Africa is pretty much just like a cleanup operation. And while Belisarius is helping restore order in Carthage, he sends out his buddy John the Armenian, who's not actually an Armenian, and sends him out to chase down Gelimer, chase down the last of his forces. And John beats the last of the Vandal forces at the Battle of Tricomarum. It was a pretty easy battle. There weren't a lot of Vandals left, and so most of them just scattered pretty quickly. And after the battle is over, Belisarius says, "Okay, go ahead and take 200 Bucularii and go ahead and just chase down Gelimer. Go ahead and capture him, bring him to me, so we can go ahead and nip this in the bud right now, make this nice and clean." And John's like, "Sure thing, boss." He takes 200 horsemen, and they run out. And they almost catch Gelimer. But right as they're catching up to them and they're getting on his tail, they get into a fight with some of Gelimer's surviving bodyguard. And in the chaos of this fight, one of the Bucularii, one of the Roman cavalry, accidentally fires an arrow into John's neck. Like it is a confirmed 100%. We know for a fact, friendly fire. And so yeah, he gets shot in the neck with an arrow. He gets knocked off his horse, and then he bleeds to death there in the sand. And they were unable to catch Gelimer, and so the Bucularii bring John's body back, and they fess up. They admit, yes, we did accidentally kill, or one of us did accidentally kill John. And then they say, but John's last words were, "Don't punish the man who killed me. I forgive him."
Were they actually, or do you think they were just covering their ass?
Nobody knows.
Does it feel within character for what we know of the guy?
We don't know. We don't know enough about John. The only defining characteristic we have about this person in history
is he gets killed by friendly fire?
Yeah, is that he was friends with Belisarius, and he won the Battle of Tricomarum, and then he got killed by friendly fire. That is all we know about this person. We don't know who they were, where they were from. That is all we know about this guy. And so it is perfectly possible that they just made it up, that he never actually said that. I kind of doubt that he would have said anything because he was shot in the neck.
Yeah, probably didn't say anything.
That's why I'm inclined to believe he probably didn't say that, but that's what they told Belisarius. Belisarius believed them because he's a very nice boy. And this was obviously very awful for Belisarius. And he's completely distraught and he's frustrated because he really wants to kill one of these guys. He really wants to kill the guy that murdered his friend on accident, but he can't because John said not to, and so he's just kind of stuck in this position where he has no way out, no emotional catharsis, no closure. And then while he's dealing with that, just a week later, he's in his tent planning on okay, how do we get Gelimer now, and where do we have to go from here? What do we have to do to complete this campaign? While he's doing all of this, and still emotionally vulnerable from what has just happened to his best friend, one of Antonina's slaves approaches him. By the way, yeah, all of these people I'm talking about right now, all of them own slaves. Yeah, it is what it is. But one of Antonina's slaves comes to him and tells him, while he's just working, and she says, "I saw your wife having sex with your godson."
So he finds about the affair.
Yes, he does.
Does he believe it?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
At first.
At first?
Because he goes and he confronts Antonina. And I don't know if I made this clear earlier. He is deeply, deeply in love with Antonina. He is extremely devoted to Antonina. He loves her more than life itself. He is completely smitten, and it's going to affect his judgment. Because he confronts her about it, and she convinces him that, oh no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. That slave backtalked me earlier, and so I had her whipped, and now she's mad at me and trying to lie about me to you to get back at me.
Wow, that's such a pathetic lie.
And Belisarius is like, yeah, that makes sense. And so, and then she's like, and you know what? She should be punished for this. We need to have her tortured and then killed for this offense. And he's like, yeah, that makes sense. And so that's exactly what they do. They torture and they kill this poor woman. And he goes on in blissful ignorance, believing that his beautiful, wonderful wife could never be unfaithful to him.
Because he's a chump.
He is a chump. But word spread about what just happened with him and Antonina, and everybody else in the camp, even like his own officers, they're all like,
"Oh, he's getting cucked."
Yeah, obviously she's fucking him. And that makes his soldiers hate him even more. They're like, why? Something I should mention here real quick. In Roman law at this period, if a woman is caught cheating on her husband, the husband is legally allowed to murder her.
That does not surprise me.
Yeah, this is how it worked at the time. And so all of his soldiers were like, well, why isn't he just killing the bitch? Like, why is he letting this go? But he's completely whipped. And so they lose. So the way his men basically see him at this point is like, okay, he's obviously a very good general. He's a pretty good leader, but he's also pretty quick to flog us or kill us for the smallest offense. And also he's being puppeteered by his shrewish wife, who is also cooking him. So good commander, weak man, basically. And so that just makes them hate him even more. And that reputation kind of spreads throughout the rest of the empire too. Everywhere he goes, any soldier knows, like, oh, that is the Dux Belisarius. He is being cucked by his wife, and he's going to whip the shit out of you if you try to take an apple off a tree. So yeah, and because of all of this discontent, a bunch of his subordinate officers start writing to Justinian, to the emperor, trying to get Belisarius in trouble. And they're telling Justinian, Belisarius is plotting to just take all of this land for himself and make himself a new emperor. And of course, that makes this basically how it goes down. Is Justinian reads these letters like, Belisarius could never do that. And then Theodora reads the letter and she's like, oh yeah, I believe these. And Justinian's just like, yeah, I believe him too.
All right, I've got to believe him because my wife told me to believe him.
And so, right. So pretty soon after all of that went down, Gelimer eventually surrendered after a brief siege at the city of Medeus. And Gelimer gets taken into custody, and he's sent to Constantinople, where he becomes a prisoner. And that's how they win the war. And North Africa is Roman again.
Yay!
And then the exact same thing happened in Italy.
Really?
There was the queen of the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy, a woman named, oh fuck this goddamn name, Amalasuentha.
I hate that name already, and
I fucking hate this name. Amalasuentha. Queen Amalasuentha was just she was the queen. She ruled the Ostrogothic kingdom, and she was pretty friendly with the Romans. Same deal. She was very friendly with the Romans. And then one of her distant cousins, a guy named Theodahad, locks her up in a prison and takes the throne for himself. And so then the Ostrogothic kingdom became hostile to Rome. And so Justinian is like, all right, Belisarius, same verse, second verse, same as the first. And Belisarius is like,
round 2, fight.
Yeah, he's like, hey, sounds great. Let's do the same thing. And so Belisarius takes his army, which has now been reinforced with some new guys from Constantinople. They hop back on their ships, and then they sail up a couple days and get to Sicily, the island at the southern point of Italy. And they conquer Sicily pretty quickly without much of a fight. They only have to really do like one major siege, and it falls after the walls fall after like 2 days. And then he marches triumphant into Syracuse, the biggest city on the island. And it is while he's in Syracuse that so this is 536. It's while he's in Syracuse that a miniature ice age begins.
What?
Yes, you heard that right. A miniature ice age. That came out of left field, didn't it?
How have I never heard about a mini ice age ever happened before?
Yep. This is called this has been called the 6th century Little Ice Age. And it is connected to another important thing that happened, which is the year 536 itself. Now, you know how I've talked about like the way historians work. They don't like to exaggerate stuff. They don't like to use like especially like direct sweeping sorts of claims about historical events. They like to keep things kind of loose and like open to interpretation because they don't really feel confident saying anything with certainty. There are multiple very prominent historians who have said directly 536 was probably the worst year in all of human history for human beings to be alive.
Fuck.
It was so fucking bad. And I'm not just talking about like here in the Mediterranean. I'm talking about the entire planet. Because in early 536, within the time span of about 2 weeks, 14 days, we had 3 of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history all happen at around the same time.
Christ.
One at Krakatoa, one in Iceland, and one in Latin America, in Central America. All within about 2 or 3 weeks of each other.
2 or 3 weeks?
Yep. And these were all like, individually, these were all like civilization ending events. Like, they wiped entire nations of people off the map. They were so big. Individually.
Damn.
And all together, these eruptions spewed so much dust and debris and ash into the atmosphere that it caused a cooling period that lasted for 8 years.
Damn. So that's what you were talking about.
Yep. And the immediate effect is for about 6 months out of that year, the sun was dim. All across the planet, the sun was dim. Like the sun was just a little bit darker. And it was colder. And all of the harvests died across the entire planet.
Jesus Christ.
Because this happened in the middle of spring, right as they were starting to plant. And so nothing grew because it's like they just extended the winter for an extra 6 or 7 months.
Christ.
And so globally, the global agricultural yields on average fell by about 40 to 50% across the entire human race. And all of this was just starting to happen right around the time that Belisarius' army is landing in Sicily.
Talk about bad timing.
Yeah. And so they end up... Now, 536 ends up not being awful for Belisarius, and they have to wait out for a while, and they start getting a little short on food eventually. But they're still doing all right because they're just hanging out. It's going to be later on when a lot of the problems start really getting bad in like all the Roman Empire. Not just because of the mass food shortages that happening over the next following years, but also because the conditions created by the mass starvation created the conditions for a plague to happen.
Damn.
And so here in a few years, we're going to be introducing for the very first time in European history the bubonic plague.
Fuck.
Yeah. And this is the very first time the bubonic plague has ever made it to Europe, and it's going to be called the Justinian plague. But we will talk more about that when we get to that part of the story, because that's still a few years off. For now, after waiting out the dark months, the sun finally comes back out, and Belisarius starts, his entire army just scared shitless that God has just ended everything. And then the sun comes back out, and they're all like, "Oh God,
we've appeased the gods. They no longer want to kill us.
We prayed hard enough, and we whipped our backs hard enough that Jesus has brought the sun back to us." And what sucks is right after the sun starts coming out again, but it starts coming out around October, and so the temperatures just stay low because they're heading back into fall. And so basically that's another nickname for 536. It was the year without a summer.
I mean, yeah, basically.
Yeah, so that sucked, but it's October now. They're getting their asses back on the road. They're getting this whole conquest thing done again. And they go and they besiege the city of Neapolis, or modern day Naples. And this is a pretty tough siege. Belisarius tries to attack it with frontal assaults a few times, but that ends up not working. He loses a bunch of men, so he starts trying to look for different tactics. He tries negotiating. That doesn't work. He tries bribing people. That doesn't work. And so he's finally getting to the point where he's kind of thinking, well, I don't want to leave Naples behind, because if I leave now, there's a chance these guys might come out of their city and come attack me from the rear. But I don't really have a choice, because I kind of have to get off my ass and get to Rome before the bulk of the Gothic armies get to me. And so he's kind of like pondering this, and he's almost about to make up his mind to just go ahead and leave when one of his scouts, he's sending out scouts like every night to go and like look at all of the walls at Naples to kind of see if they can find any weaknesses. And one of his scouts comes back and he's like, "Hey, I found a weakness." And he's like, "Good job, here's a bonus." And it turns out the weakness that they found is that there is this old, unused, abandoned aqueduct that leads into the city over the walls. And at the point where it meets the wall, there's a part of the wall that's collapsed. And there's a small hole. It's not big enough for a person to get through, but they could get through it if they expanded the wall.
All right.
And so Belisarius goes ahead and orders it. He's like, "Okay, get some guys together with pickaxes. Go ahead and dig out a hole in that wall big enough for a bunch of guys to get through." And that's what they do. And then just before he orders an attack, he sends a letter into he basically tells the guys in the city, the garrison in the city, like, "We found a way into your city. You have a weakness in your defenses that you didn't know about. And I'm going to give you this one opportunity to go ahead and surrender with your lives, because if you don't, I can't guarantee your safety when we come in."
And they thought he was bluffing.
They thought he was bluffing. But that's the thing. Belisarius, he was just trying to do like the honorable thing and like give them an opportunity to do this without much of a struggle and let them go away with their lives, because, it's the right honorable thing to do. But they think that he's bullshitting them. They think he's just trying to get them to come out of their safety. And so they're like, "Fuck no, fuck you, dude. We're sitting right here where it's safe." And so Belisarius is like, "It is with a heavy heart that I must now commit genocide." And so he orders all of his guys through the wall, and they come into the city, and they just fucking rip the place apart. It's a fucking bloodbath. It's awful. And they probably should have believed him.
I mean, they probably definitely should have. Like, damn.
So yeah, then they so Naples is a bloody burning ruin now. So that was November of 536. Shortly after that, that guy I mentioned, Theodahad, who usurped the throne of the Ostrogothic kingdom, he gets usurped himself.
I'm assuming there's a bunch of usurping at this time.
Yeah, especially during wars like this where you lose a lot. So a bunch of people got pissed off at Theodahad because he wasn't able to defend Naples. And so he gets overthrown, and this new guy named Vitigus becomes the king. And Vitigus realizes where the winds are turning. Is like, okay, time to get out of town for a little while. And so he leaves Rome, the city of Rome. He just up and leaves.
He got out of Dodge.
He got out of Dodge. He took his army with him to go regroup up at the main capital of the empire, or of the Ostrogothic kingdom, up in the city of.
I didn't realize how Midwest getting out of Dodge was until honestly a couple years ago, because that's not a lot of Northerners really know about it. Not a lot of East Coast people.
Yeah, isn't Dodge a town in old West Kansas?
I don't remember what state it was.
So, Vitiges, he takes his army back to Ravenna, the capital of the kingdom, and the people in Rome were like, okay, let's not do what Naples did. Whatever they did was wrong, because that was the bad outcome. So let's do something different. And so they just throw open the gates and they let Belisarius in. And that is the first time that Rome is controlled by Romans in about, when is this? This is
100 years.
This is 536. So it's 60 years.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. That's actually pretty heavy to think about. Something as monument, yeah.
If you stop and think about history for any amount of time, you really realize the weight of the sins of humanity and that we all deserve extinction.
Yeah, I guess. I'm now realizing a major flaw in drinking Belisarius, he gets his guys set up in Rome. It's a pretty big deal, a pretty big, crazy thing. First thing he does is he figures that if he stays long enough, eventually they're going to come and they're going to want to take Rome back.
Yeah.
And so, first thing he does is he starts stockpiling all the food, all the water, anything he can get his hands on, starts stockpiling it. Second thing he does is he starts conscripting a bunch of the citizens of Rome and starts training them how to use weapons and shit. So he can just bolster his army a little bit, because he's gonna need all. Yeah, because he is definitely gonna be outnumbered. I think he has about 20,000 troops. The Ostrogoths definitely have somewhere in the ballpark of 40,000. They're probably gonna bring at least 25 or 30,000.
Yeah.
So he's definitely going to be outnumbered. So he's going to need all hands on deck.
He'd be taking it without lube.
Yeah. So one day he's got a portion of his army. He's got portions of his army outside the city walls. They're guarding a bunch of bridges that lead from the pass, that all along the roads that connect Rome and Ravenna. He's got big chunks of his army stationed at each of the bridges. And one day he's out doing inspections and doing a little bit of his own scouting and stuff. He's got out with 1,000 or so of his bucularii, and they're just wandering around from bridge to bridge, checking things out. And they wander along one of these bridges, the Salarian Bridge. And when they get there, they notice that there are no Roman soldiers around here like he had stationed them at. And then the second thing they realize is there's a whole fuck ton of Goths here. And so they accidentally run headfirst into the vanguard of the Gothic army, who are themselves all cavalry, and a giant cavalry fight ensues. And it's a really brutal one, and Belisarius is right in the thick of it. People are stabbing each other, knocking each other off their horses. It just rains, so it's all muddy. So everybody's getting covered in mud and shit. And they're outnumbered 5-1. It's pretty bad odds for them. So they hold out as long as they can. But eventually Belisarius orders a retreat for his survivors. There's about 700 left afterwards. And they start running away. And they beeline directly for the nearest gate at the walls of the city. And they all roll up. And they come up to the gates. And they start screaming up in Greek to open up the door. In Greek and in Latin. Anything that anybody up there would understand. And the guys who are running the gates, they look down and they don't see a bunch of bucularii. They don't see a bunch of Romans. They see a bunch of guys on horses covered in mud and gore. And so, for a variety of reasons, one being, look at all that gore. Another being, I can't actually tell what uniforms they're wearing, what color their armor is, where they're from, which side they're from, because they are all drenched in mud. They're all covered in mud.
And blood.
And blood. And intestines and stuff. I think that's an exaggeration, but there was a lot of blood. And so the guys who are running the gates were like, no, we're not letting you in. You guys might be Goths. And Belisarius is shouting back up like, I'm your fucking general. Let me in. We're all gonna fucking die out here. And they're like, no, I don't think you're Belisarius. I think I'd recognize my general. And he's like, I am your general. And he gets frustrated and he realizes that he's about to die. And so he looks at all of his bucularii and he's like, all right, I guess we go out in a blaze of glory. And so he forms them all up. And just as they're finishing forming up, the Goths come up over the horizon and are rushing full speed at them. And so they charge right back. And because the bucularii are all heavily armored, they carry a lot of mass in their charges. And so when you've got a horse with no armor running headlong at a horse with armor, the one with armor is going to win that test of strength just on weight alone. And so they rush in. They immediately just knock the shit out of like several hundred Goth cavalrymen just in an instant, just by running at them and knocking into them. And then they just start stabbing shit, and they're fighting for their lives. They are just brutally hacking and stabbing at anything that moves, just pumping with adrenaline. And the guys up on the wall are watching this all happen, and they're just staring in awe at the spectacle of it. Just these guys outnumbered like 5-1, just knocking guys over left and right. And eventually one of them gets knocked out of just watching the only entertaining thing that's ever happened in any of these guys' lives, and comes to his senses and realizes, oh God, that is Belisarius. We've got to get this gate open.
No shit, Sherlock.
And so they get the gate open, and Belisarius looks back. He's like, well, it's about fucking time. And they all turn around, and he breaks off the attack. They all turn around. They rush away. They get behind the walls, and then they close the gate right as the Goths come back up. That's how Belisarius almost fucking died.
I can't tell if that counts as a loss for our sip or not.
It's technically a loss, yeah.
Sip.
It's what we call a tactical loss, but a strategic victory. Because tactically they didn't win, but their strategic goal of getting back behind those walls was a success. So yeah, that is how the first siege of Rome begins. And they are not going to be back outside those walls for another 374 days.
Over a year?
Yep, the siege is going to go from March 537 to March of 538. So the Goths invest. Vitiges brings his army up, and they cover off all of the exits to the city, all of the gates. They cut off all of the water going into the city, all of the aqueducts. And they start waiting for a little while. They decide to go ahead and try, test it out a little bit. And so Vitiges launches an attack. They built a bunch of siege towers, those giant, just small skyscrapers that can carry a shit ton of soldiers over the top of a wall. They build a few of those. And then on the day of the assault, they start marching them forward. And Belisarius, he's got all of his guys formed up on the walls, and they're all looking and they're all waiting. And when he sees the tower start to come close, this is actually recorded in the history book, like from first-hand accounts. When he sees the towers come close enough to make out details, he starts laughing out loud. And he tells all of his men on the walls, don't even bother trying to fire your arrows yet. Just hold your fire till I give the order. And then while the Gothic towers are coming forward, he gets out his own bow and arrow and he starts taking pot shots at some of the cavalrymen that are kind of flanking the towers. And for the first few shots, none of the arrows are able to make it far enough to reach him. But as they get closer, he starts getting a little closer to some of these cavalry. And eventually they get close enough where he's consistently able to start making hits on some of the horsemen. And he eventually kills 3 of the horsemen with his arrows. And so he's like, okay, they're close enough. And then he points at the front of the towers, where it is now very clear these towers are being pulled by ox. There are ox at the front of the towers pulling the towers, and they are completely unarmored and undefended. And so he's like, all right, all the archers on the walls, just shoot at those ox. And within about 30 seconds, all of the oxen are dead, and the towers become useless hunks of trash in the middle of a field. And that is how the first Gothic assault goes.
Just like obvious weakness.
Yeah. A few months later, you're getting to the point where they're starting to run low on food and supplies. Their reserves of water are starting to run out. People in Rome are starting to get a bit paranoid and discontent with the situation, naturally. And so, this is a weird story. Belisarius does something kind of funky. To try and to quiet discontent and to try and what's the word? To nip any disloyalty in the bud, I suppose. What he does is he identifies who he believes is the ringleader of traitors within the city who are funneling money or funneling information out to the Goths. And he decides that he wants to make a public spectacle of this person. And this person is, you might not have heard the name, but you might have heard the title somewhere. This guy's job. His name was Pope Silverius.
Never heard of that Pope, but yeah, I've heard of the title.
Yeah, the Pope. The leader...
Who hasn't heard of the Pope, to be honest?
Right. The leader of the Latin Christian Church. So this guy, Silverius, he was actually appointed by force to the position of Pope by the previous king of the Ostrogoths. And as a result, Belisarius believed that his loyalty lied with the Goths instead of with the Romans. And so he had this guy publicly defrocked and had his robes stripped off of him, paraded him through the city, declaring he was a traitor, and then had him thrown in a jail cell to rot. And then he put his own puppet pope in power.
Of course.
Pope Vigilius. So that was a weird sort of story. Once the siege is over, Silverius is going to be sent to prison in Constantinople, and then eventually he's going to be pardoned, and Justinian is going to tell him that he can be reappointed as the pope. But by that point, Pope Vigilius is already in power. And so it probably would have caused some pretty bad political problems to happen between the Byzantines and the church. But that was all resolved because Silverius disappeared. He just disappeared. And when I say disappeared, I don't mean he like physically disappeared. I mean he disappeared from history.
So he just doesn't show up again in history books?
Yeah, he's pardoned and he's sent back to Italy, and we don't know what happened to him. Some legends or some folk stories go that he was assassinated by Belisarius' men on his way back to Italy. Another story goes that he was, even though he was pardoned, he was never released from his cell in Constantinople, and he just starved to death in his cell.
Sounds like something would happen.
Yeah. But we don't know what happened to him, but now he's a saint, so that's interesting.
Weird, but okay.
Yeah, He's the patron saint of one random island off the coast of Italy. It's weird. Anyways, so then you get the second assault on Callinicum, on Rome, the second Gothic assault. And the reason I said Callinicum is because this is kind of Callinicum Part 2. Because the Goths attack the walls, and then the Goths are repulsed, and the Goths fall back. And then Belisarius' army comes out of the city, attacks the Goths, beats the Goths start to run away, and then all of Belisarius' troops start running forward to chase them down and kill them as they're running away. And then they reach the Gothic camp, and they find a bunch of money there. And they start looting the camp, which gives the Goths enough time to regroup, turn around, and come back and kill a bunch of them back. And then they're forced to run back into the city. And, yeah, like I said, Callinicum Part 2, almost beat for beat. And this really, really traumatized Belisarius. He did not take this very well, because it was literally the exact same mistake that he made all the way back in Syria at the start of his career all over again.
Yikes.
And then so they keep up the siege for a few months. The weird thing is Belisarius ends up winning this siege despite that really bad defeat during the second assault, because Justinian sends another army to help him out, and the other army lands like right next to Ravenna. And so Vitiges finds out that his capital is being threatened by another army, and so he's like, okay, I don't think Rome is worth it for this. We need to go back to Ravenna and protect it. And so he lifted the siege and backed off, and that's how Belisarius ended up pulling victory from the jaws of defeat. So, yay.
Yay.
Yeah. So from there, the rest of the war was kind of slow and kind of grindy, because
that's how wars go.
This war was especially not great, in large part because the two main sub-commanders under Belisarius both hated him, like, hard. They despised him. One of them was this guy named Narses, who was a close personal confidant of the Emperor Justinian, who thought that he should be the one in charge because Belisarius was just this lowly peasant boy, and Narses was this man of noble pedigree who had the ear of the emperor and all of that kind of horse shit. And then the other guy is just a guy named John, just another guy named John. So even though it's slow going, eventually Belisarius does besiege Ravenna, and it takes a little while. It takes about 2 years, but finally they get to Ravenna, and they cut off all of the grain imports into Ravenna, and the city starts to kind of starve. And so all of the nobility, including Vitiges, in the city of Ravenna, decide they want to try to play a little bit of political trickery with the Byzantine political system. And so they come to Belisarius and they're like, hey, if you let us stay in charge here in Ravenna and kind of run our own shit in Italy, we are willing to recognize you as the emperor, specifically the Western emperor. Because, like, back in the Roman Empire, before the Western Empire fell, they had two emperors. They had an Eastern one and the Western one. And they already had an Eastern one in Justinian, so they were saying, hey, maybe you could come and you could be the Western Emperor, just like the good old days. And maybe once you're the Western Emperor, you let us stay in charge here in Ravenna, and we can kind of help you run shit and kind of be, like, part of the, like, high-ranking parts of the empire. Does that sound good to you? And here's where things get squirrely. Belisarius, he takes their proposal and he chews on it, and he kind of looks at it, and he kind of rolls it around in his hand a little bit, looking at it, and really thinks hard about it. And he comes back to him. He's like, you know what? Yeah, I would like to be the emperor. I want you guys to make me the emperor. Why don't you go ahead and let me into the city with my army, and we can go ahead and have a whole ceremony where I become emperor. And so they're like, okie dokie, sounds great. And they open up the gates and let him and his army in. He comes in and he immediately arrests all of those fucking idiots. And he stands up before the citizens of Ravenna and he declares, I reclaim this city in the name of Emperor Justinian the First. And he affirms that he is no emperor and there is only one emperor of Rome and that is not him. And so that is how the first part of the Gothic War in Italy, the first Gothic War in Italy, is finished. Witigis and all of his commanders are now prisoners, and Ravenna and Rome are now back in Roman control. And life is great, and everything is awesome. And Theodora has been talking to Justinian again because they heard about that thing that happened in Ravenna where they offered Belisarius the position of emperor of the Roman Empire. They offered to make him that, and he said yes. And yeah, it looks like it was a sort of bait and switch, but what if it wasn't?
What do you mean?
That's what Theodora is saying to Justinian.
Oh, okay.
What if it wasn't actually? What if he did really want to become the emperor? And so Justinian is like, okay, and so he sends a message to Belisarius. He's like, hey, I heard what you fucking did in Ravenna. I'm stripping you of your rank. Come back to Constantinople. You're being put on trial.
So, shot?
Gross.
Cheers.
And Belisarius, probably none too happy about this, arrives back in Constantinople. There is an inquiry. He explains himself. And Justinian decides, like, okay, I believe you. Here's your rank back.
So that's twice now he talked his way out of shit.
Yes. But now people in Constantinople, like all the powerful people in Constantinople, are starting to wonder, like, what is happening to Justinian? Because this is the second time that he's wanted to do something drastic to Belisarius and then changed his mind. So what's happening to Justinian and what is Belisarius up to? Because this is all very confusing and it all looks really suspicious. And it only really makes sense if you understand that, like, Justinian's kind of wishy-washy on some of the things that he wants to do, especially in regards to Belisarius. He's being very heavily influenced by Theodora in that respect. So he gets his rank back, but at this point, Justinian still is like, it's starting to wear down on him, all of Theodora's stuff about Belisarius. And he still doesn't fully trust Belisarius anymore. And so instead of sending him back to Italy, where he might try to make himself an emperor, instead he sends him back out east to fight the Persians again, because of course they're back at fucking war again. This is a war called the Lazic War, because it's over a region called Lazica, which is near, it's up in the Caucasus again, it's near Armenia and Georgia and all that. So at this point, after the defeat at the Battle of Rome, during the Siege of Rome, where Callinicum 2.0, Belisarius is now allergic to pitched battles. He does not want to fight a battle at all. He does not believe that he can win them anymore. And so,
I mean, yeah, that would shoot any man's confidence after that.
Yeah. And so while is fighting the Persians in the east, mainly what he's doing is he's using trickery and deceit to kind of run the Persians in circles. There's this one story where he offers to kind of sit down and negotiate surrender with all of the Persians, with some Persian diplomats. And when the Persian representatives show up, he brought 6,000 of his troops, which 6,000 was about a third of his army. But he ordered all 6,000 of them to only come in hunting gear, not in their battle kit, to only bring like their hunting knives and their bows and arrows. And so when all of the Persian representatives showed up, they saw all of these guys and they all looked like they were dressed up to hunt. And so what they looked like to the Persians was a hunting party for the rest of the army. And so they thought, if this is the size of their hunting party, how massive is their army? Because this is so many guys. And so that is how he trolled the man. That's how he trolled Khosrow, the man who dedicated his entire life to trolling the Roman. And he convinced Khosrow to pull all of his armies back into Persia.
I mean, that's the best way to get out of it.
Yeah, and so that was kind of like the end of the Lazic War. And Belisarius ends up getting credited with driving the Persians out of Roman territory and for avenging the defeat at the end of the last war against the Persians. So it's kind of in the eyes of the Roman public, he's kind of made up for his failure at the Battle of Callinicum. Something else happens while he's in Syria. While he's in the east. So his have I mentioned Photius yet? Photius.
No, not Photius. You mentioned Procopius.
Oh, Procopius. Yeah, not talking about Procopius. This is Photius is Belisarius' stepson.
Yeah, you mentioned that he had a stepson, but you didn't really go into him.
Yeah, so Photius is Antonina's son from her previous marriage. And Photius hates his mom, and he loves Belisarius. And Photius has just recently been back in Constantinople while he's on leave from his military duties. And he caught his mother in bed with who else but Theodosius. And so as soon as he discovered this, he hopped on a horse and ran all the way to Syria just to go and meet Belisarius and tell him, yeah, I personally saw Antonina and Theodosius going at it like rabbits.
Damn.
And I think this is about the point
where he actually realizes she's been fucking around on him.
Well, yes, this is the moment when he realizes that all of the nagging feelings that he's been having in the back of his head about it, all of those little hints and red flags that he's seen throughout his time abroad while he's had Antonina and Theodosius with him. And then those feelings compounded on all of the shit that he's been through, all of the failure and all of the rough living of being on campaign, mixed with the constant regular betrayal from his own emperor, who he has served so much. Belisarius had like a nervous breakdown.
I mean, yeah.
He had a pretty bad emotional He reacted to the news by falling to his knees sobbing and curling up at Photius' feet and begging Photius with tears running down his face that Photius will help him kill Antonina and Theodosius.
Oh, I was about to say he has the right to kill the wife, but killing the paramour too?
Nope, he's going after both of them. He's getting them all.
Does he have the legal right on the paramour?
No, but he's been through too much shit, man. He can't do it anymore. He never got to kill somebody when John the Armenian died. So this is God making up for that little shortcoming maybe. And so Photius agrees, and they hatch a plan. And their plan is to pull some strings in the military back in Constantinople and have Photius reassigned to another army in Ephesus, I think, or Epirus, I can't remember. It starts with an E. And then have Antonina come and join Belisarius out in the east while he's on campaign. And so that's what they do. And so they're separated, and Antonina comes to Belisarius, and he immediately has her arrested and thrown into a cell. Meanwhile, while that is happening, Theodosius shows up to his new posting, and Photius captures him and has him arrested, and similarly has him thrown into a cell as well.
Lovely. And
they have everything is in order. Belisarius, he wants Theodosius to die first, and so at this point he's waiting until he hears that Photius has finished killing Theodosius before he does what he's gonna do to Antonina. But he never hears back from Photius. And
why does he never hear back from Photius?
Instead, he receives a letter from Theodora, the Empress Theodora.
Lovely.
And Theodora informs him that Theodosius has been freed and that he is currently walking free. And Photius has been arrested for kidnapping and is currently being tortured in a dungeon in Constantinople. And she demands Belisarius' immediate audience with herself and with the emperor, and that should any harm befall Antonina, then he will automatically become a fugitive, and he will be hunted down until he is killed by imperial authority.
Love.
And so after this great redeeming victory against Persia, he is drawn back to Constantinople, where he faces a sort of like impromptu trial for attempted murder. And he's technically found guilty, but it wasn't like a real trial. It's kind of complicated. And then after being found guilty, he is immediately pardoned by Justinian.
Justinian just likes this guy too much.
He loves this guy, but he also hates this guy because he believes everything he hears from Theodora. But the main reason, though, why he let Belisarius go is because things were going bad in Italy. Things were going really fucking bad in Italy. And everybody they had sent to try and deal with the problem so far had completely shit the bed.
Of course.
And Justinian was coming to the realization, regardless of what his wife says, that the only guy who can actually fix the situation in Italy is the guy who brought Italy into the empire in the first place, and that is Belisarius. And so I can't have this guy jailed or killed for some personal matter with his wife. I need to have this guy out in Italy fixing this shit. And hey, if he ends up declaring himself emperor, it's a risk we have to take. This shit is too fucked to deal with otherwise. We need Belisarius. And so that's what happens. 544, Belisarius gets sent back to Italy. And so what's actually going on is that the Ostrogoths are resurgent. They've come back, even though all of their leadership was captured and jailed. These two new guys named Ildibad and Totila. Not that last name I mentioned?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that name?
I'm assuming it's some kind of relation of Attila.
No, I'm just the pronunciation, Totila.
I just assumed I was ignorant for thinking it sounded like tortilla, and I was going to shut my mouth.
No, that's exactly it. It sounds like a white person saying tortilla. Anyways, a dumb tangent. So these two guys are actually like outstanding commanders. Like almost to the same level as Belisarius himself. And while they're facing like this actually very competent new foe, all of the Roman forces in Italy are in really dire shape. And there's a couple reasons for that. For one thing, the governor that Justinian put in place to be like the main, to be the governor that Justinian appointed. I don't know why I made that more difficult than it had to be. He is insanely corrupt. And so one of the big things that he's doing is all of the money, all of the coinage that he's using to pay all of the Roman troops in Italy, whenever he gets coins from Constantinople, because they'll send him all the money that he needs to pay his troops, whenever those coins come, he'll have all of the coins clipped. So literally just taking a clipper and clipping an end off of part of the coin, which means that there's less precious metal in the coin, which means that it becomes devalued. It becomes lower than face value.
Yeah.
And then he'll take all of the clippings and then he'll melt them down and use them to mint new coins, which he then keeps.
Yeah, that's why our current coins are made the way they are. You see the discoloration on the edges. It's because that's not actually the precious metal that they want it to, so no one does that anymore.
Mm-hmm. And so all of the troops, all the Roman troops in Italy, at least the ones that were actually getting paid, because a lot of them like kind of weren't, the ones that were getting paid were getting a pretty significant amount less than they should have been, because even though they were getting the right coin amount,
they were getting the coins shaved off.
Yeah, they were all devalued. And so they weren't actually worth as much as they were supposed to. And so that was causing a bunch of defections and stuff. Another thing that was causing defections was the fact that the plague had happened. This is where the around 541 through 544, or 540, I'm sorry, like 547, I think. The plague is happening. The Justinian plague, the first introduction of the bubonic plague to Western civilization. By the end of the Justinian plague, about 20% of the entire population of the Roman Empire, of the Byzantine Empire, will be dead. And there are some real fucking horror stories that come out of this. In Constantinople itself, the city was hit really hard by the Justinian plague. There are stories about because first the graveyards in the city ran out of space, and so next they started digging up any empty fields or lots, and digging those up and creating mass graves, and then they filled those up and they ran out of space. And so after that, they started storing bodies in the walls of the defensive walls of the city, which if you'll remember from the Attila the Hun episode, those walls are like 60 feet tall, 20 feet thick, and run for anywhere between 7 and 11 miles. There's a lot of space in those walls, and they ran out of space to put bodies inside the walls.
In the walls? Holy fuck.
And so they had nothing else to do. They had to start throwing the bodies just over on the other side of the wall. They just started throwing bodies over the wall because they couldn't keep them in the streets, because that's how it spread. And so anybody approaching Constantinople from the west would come down the road and come up to the gate and look to their left and their right and just see piles of human bodies stacked 10, 15, 20 feet, just haphazardly thrown from the parapets, just creeping up the wall, and black and green and oozing from rot and decay, and just falling apart and spilling out onto the grass surrounding the wall. That's how it's described. And there are horror novels that you could write about this setting. You could be 100% historically accurate in every single facet. It would be one of the worst horror stories that has ever been written.
You could write a horror story from the perspective of a soldier that's in the army that follows from scene to scene, and just how more traumatized they get.
Yeah, I would venture to argue, just like 536, potentially the worst year in human history to have ever lived. This is arguably the worst century in human history to have ever lived. And I'm realizing now why I get so sad and depressed and need to take a break from reading about history so often, even though it's the subject that I love and that I dedicate most of my waking hours to. Is because all of the stuff that I find interesting is things that are slowly draining my soul away until I'm an empty husk. And man, it fucking sucks. So yeah, that is the plague that the Roman soldiers in Italy are dealing with. And so that, combined with all of the Roman governors' corruption, are causing like mass mutinies. The Roman army is hemorrhaging troops. Not to mention all of the ones that are just straight up dying from the plague. And so, like, Justinian was desperate to get this situation unfucked. And so he sent Belisarius back, and Belisarius arrives. And Belisarius, like, did a lot of fucked up shit, but dealing with Justinian's crap over and over and over again like this, and still happily going out to do his duty as a general over and over again. The man is a fucking saint. So he arrives, and on top of all the other problems, his army in Italy is also chronically undersupplied, because which is contributing to even more mutinies. And it's undersupplied because all the supplies have to come from Constantinople. And at that moment, Constantinople is becoming one giant mass grave. Kind of hard to find manpower to load up the ships.
I just assumed manpower was like short everywhere.
Yeah, and so he found it impossible to maneuver his army with any amount of speed because nobody was able to. They were unlimited rations. And because he wasn't able to maneuver, the Gothic armies were able to outmaneuver him at every turn. Eventually, they were able to recapture Rome, and there was nothing he could do about it because he couldn't get his army there in time to protect it. And so Rome ended up falling. They kept having some back and forth for a little while. Eventually, the plague started to subside after a few years, because this whole process that I'm kind of summarizing right now took like 4 years. This is 544 through 549.
It's obvious there's a lot of stuff you have to like skim over with how much is going on right now.
And so after a couple of years of Rome, the city of Rome being back in Gothic hands, he's eventually able to like get his troops resupplied, get them back up to something resembling an organized army, and is able to go and retake Rome. He's able to outmaneuver and force the Goths to abandon Rome, and is able to take it back. But after 4 years of this, with not really anything to show for it, because there was a plague, there's not much he could do with this army, but it didn't get worse. It was getting a lot worse for Romans in Italy before Belisarius got there, and then when he got there, he managed to stop the situation from getting any worse.
But it wasn't getting any better.
Right, it wasn't getting any better because conditions just wouldn't allow for that. Nature was running her course, but it stopped getting worse, and that was thanks to Belisarius. He was able to keep things organized. He was able to keep people's spirits up. He was able to scrounge what few supplies he actually could just to keep something resembling an army on its feet. He was able to keep that active long enough to keep the Goths from just completely overrunning southern Italy. And eventually, when supplies were able to start coming back in again, and he was able to bolster his army a little bit better, he could start maneuvering them better, he got back into general mode, and he was able to start making some progress again, aka retaking back Rome, which is not an insignificant thing. And had he been allowed to keep going, he probably would have just kept marching all the way to Ravenna and retaken it, and even potentially kept going from there. He could have taken the rest of Italy all in if he just had time. If they just let him. But Justinian didn't let him.
Was it still the trust thing?
It was still the trust thing, but it was also just the lack of progress. Because Belisarius staunched the bleeding, but he wasn't healing the wound. He wasn't making the progress that Justinian wanted to see, which is the whole reason he sent them there in the first place. And so Justinian his jealousy meter started to perk again. And so once again, Justinian recalls him back to Constantinople, once again holds another inquiry for him, which once again finds him innocent of any wrongdoing. But he's...
Jesus Christ, how often does he get found innocent?
Well, they can never prove that he's done anything wrong because he hasn't. The only thing they ever had on him was when he agreed to take the position of the Western Emperor from the Gothic elites in Ravenna, and it was obvious to everyone that was just a ploy to trick them into letting him into the city. They could never prove that was something that he genuinely wanted. And other than that, there has never been any proof that he has been anything but loyal and competent in service to Justinian and to the empire. And so as much as Theodora, Justinian sometimes, all of the elites in Constantinople, and all of the other officers, all of the other generals in the Roman army, as much as they just want to see him suffer, want to see him taken down a peg. They just don't have anything on him. The worst they have on him is that he lost some battles, which were tough fights to begin with. And that they can't hold him to that unreasonable standard. I mean, they could. That's something that they would do, I'm sure, in any other situation. But when he has the resources that he needs, he's so goddamn competent that he is a resource that they cannot afford to waste. And they know it, but they still keep trying to kick him out, to find some reason to remove him at the same time. And that is what is so infuriating about this whole system to read about.
I'm surprised he didn't get just tired of their bullshit and just be like, okay, I'm going to fuck off now.
That's what he does now. He's doing that now. After he gets found innocent this time, he says, all right, fuck all of you people. I'm retiring. Here's my resignation. Justinian, fuck you. Theodora, fuck you. Everybody in the army, the entire army, every single one of you, fuck all of you collectively. I am going home and I am taking a nap. And that is exactly what he did. He went back to...
Fuck you guys, I'm going home.
In 550, he finally retires from military service and retires to his estate in... Oh, this fucking name. Rufiniane, which is a sort of like gentry estate just east of Constantinople on the Asian side. And it appears that is it for his career at the moment. Lots of people are relieved that they don't have to deal with him in the army anymore. And lots of people are relieved that they found a way to get rid of him without actually having to outright kill him, because that's very politically convenient, because, you know, most people see him as a hero because of all of the heroic stuff he's done to serve the empire. And so he just lives quietly the last of his life. Interestingly, still with Antonina.
I would have dropped that bitch.
I don't think I finished that part of the story where after they got capped. Oh, wait, no, yeah, I did. Never mind.
There was a trial, and basically he got found innocent, but I'm guessing nothing ever happened with Antonina.
Yeah, nothing ever happened with Antonina. She had Theodora's support, and so by extension she had the Emperor's protection as well. And so she was untouchable, even by Belisarius. And so he just settles down to his quiet life. I'm sure it's something he's dreamed about for a long, long time. And 9 years pass. Fast forward to the year 559. Things are still going on. The plague is in the past. It's still popping up every once in a while. But all in all, things are better. It's still war everywhere, but they're getting close at this point. They're getting close to finally pacifying Italy and bringing it more permanently into their grasp. And Belisarius, he's doing his thing, doing his retirement thing. I'm sure he's having a great time. I can only imagine how happy he is in this situation. I mean, besides having to see Antonina every day, but my bitch wife. 559. A letter comes for him. A letter from Justinian.
Oh goodness, what did Justinian do now?
Justinian is desperate because all of the Roman Empire's armies are currently out and about doing all of the different wars that they're involved in at that moment. And there's a force of nomadic horse people called the Avars. In the primary documents, they're just referred to as Huns. They're not Hunnic. They're not Hunnic people. They don't come from like Attila's group of people. They're from a different nomadic tribe called the Avars that have just recently settled in like the northern Balkans. And there's a group of them, about 7,000 strong, and they have just crossed the frozen over Danube River
And they're marching into the empire to raid and plunder and pillage, and they are heading towards Constantinople. And so pretty much all of the Roman army is nowhere near Constantinople. There's nobody there that can stop these Avars from going anywhere, doing anything, basically. They could just roam free and pillage and kill as they please. What they've got is about 400 veteran troops who had fought in Italy, and they had 300. And they had about 1,000 local civilians near where the Avars were invading that had some form of previous military experience and were arming themselves with secondhand swords and pitchforks. And Justinian came to Belisarius and begged him to come out of retirement for one last campaign, standing up to 7,000 horse archers, steppe people who have been trained from birth to ride horses and to kill people while riding horses, armed with nothing but a few hundred aging out veterans and a bunch of poorly trained civilians with gardening tools. And Belisarius decides that he likes the sound of those odds, and he immediately hops on his horse and heads out and meets up with his new army, 1,300 strong. He masses them in 562. Or I'm sorry, no. God damn it. Yeah, it's still 559. 559, he arrives outside of a town called Meluntius. And he arrays his forces, and they are attacked by the Avars, all on horseback. This is one section of the Avar force. There's about 2,000, so they're still outnumbered. They are attacked and assaulted by the Avars, but their lines hold, and eventually Belisarius is able to spring his trap. He outmaneuvers the horse archers, again, with a bunch of civilians on foot against guys on horseback. Outmaneuvers them, encircles them, crushes them from two sides, and forces them running. He then sends his troops, again, after the horses to chase them down and keep on their ass so thoroughly that they are not able to regroup before they are chased all the way back to the Danube River. This is an unheard of feat of military accomplishment.
It sounds like they were chased pretty damn far.
There has never been a situation in all of Roman military history up to this point where they have ever fought a horse tribal people riding on horseback who outnumber them with an army where the majority of the people fighting are not trained soldiers. That is absurd.
Sounds like they pulled a hell of a victory out the ass.
Belisarius was a fucking genius. I would argue easily the greatest military mind of his generation. You know what I'm going to say next?
But he fucked up somehow?
He didn't fuck up. This was actually brilliant. He is once again, almost a decade after his retirement, he is once again being hailed throughout the empire as the great hero and the savior of the Roman Empire. What happens next is...
aggravating, I'm guessing?
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
I'm guessing the queen finally got her wishes, empress or whatever, got her wishes, and he was dragged back one last time.
Yeah, Justinian had him arrested because seeing all of this popularity brought up all of his old feelings of paranoia, and he started getting scared that someone as popular as Belisarius was, even in retirement, he still posed a political threat. And so he's brought in 562. It took a couple years, but it's a couple years after that last battle. He is brought in, and he is put on trial accused of plotting to overthrow Justinian. And he is found guilty.
The final time he was found guilty. Did they sentence him to execution?
Well, one old folk tale from that became popular in the Middle Ages. One legend about this story goes that after being found guilty, Justinian had both of his eyes plucked out of his head.
Yeah.
And he was then forced to walk the streets of Constantinople begging for money for the rest of his life. That's one story. But we do actually know what happened. That's not what actually happened. What did actually happen is Justinian pardoned him.
What?
Yeah. Justinian pardoned him.
What in the hootenanna? For the audience at home, I'm doing the rapid blink meme.
You're doing the soy jack face.
Do explain, because I'm fucking lost.
Nothing. He just pardoned him.
What happened after that? Did he just go home? What?
He went home, he lived for a few more years, and then he died peacefully in his sleep.
Talk about fucking anticlimactic ending.
Yeah, crazy fucking anticlimactic. He died a revered hero of the Roman Empire.
I was not expecting that pardon at the end. Holy fuck.
Yeah, maybe that's why all these fucking people made up that story later on in the Middle Ages about him getting his eyes plucked out. Because that's a more compelling story than the one we actually got.
Christ almighty, Derek.
He just died peacefully in his sleep. He died in March of 565, and then Justinian died in November of 565. So they died very close to one another. And Justinian lived long enough to see Belisarius die. So, the last thing we got to talk about is what did all of this mean?
I was about to say, how did that turn out for him with the war? He begged him to come back, and it was like, oh no, fuck you, you're too popular. Trial, but I'm also going to pardon you, but whatever.
I can't even begin to unravel because to try and explain why Justinian pardoned him so many times, I'd have to explain both the political climate of the Roman Empire at the time, the social climate of Constantinople at the time, the psychology of a man as fucking enigmatic as Justinian the Great. I'd have to explain all of those in detail just to begin to prick the surface of why those pardons happened. Or why those trials happened in the first place. So many times.
That's insane, brother.
First, let's talk, as we're closing this out, let's talk about Justinian's legacy. Who was this guy and why was he important? So, combined together, the careers of okay, well, here, let me start over. Over the course of Justinian's career as the emperor of the Roman Empire, he expanded the borders of the Roman Empire, of the Eastern Roman Empire, by about 45%.
45%?
Which is no small thing. 45%. They went from controlling basically just the Eastern Mediterranean, from Greece down to Egypt, to controlling all of North Africa, all of Italy, all of the Balkans, and a good chunk of Spain as well. That was a different campaign that had nothing to do with Belisarius, but that happened as well. This career was the closest that the Roman Empire would ever have to reuniting the Mediterranean under a single banner since the Roman Empire itself fell in 476. It wouldn't last for very long after Justinian's death. Especially in Italy, it started to fall apart pretty quickly. But they did hold the city of Rome for another 50 years or so after his death. Eventually, the Italy would be invaded from the north by another migrating Germanic tribe called the Lombards. They would eventually force the Byzantines down into just the southern part of Italy, and they would establish their own kingdom in Italy for a little while. They'd eventually get defeated themselves by some other outside forces, and eventually fall apart politically. You had this whole like century of like political turmoil and chaos in Italy that was kind of a fucking nightmare. Imagine like a dystopian hellscape. That was basically the 6th century for Italy because of all of this crap. But for a time, it did become something resembling the Roman Empire again. What can I say? What else can I say about Justinian? We've already talked about Justinian's legacy as far as like his legal reforms.
It sounds like he did a hell of a lot of stuff, and it's insane we don't know about him.
Yeah, he's obviously left like a very noticeable mark on the physical culture of Constantinople. You can still see a good chunk of the buildings that he had commissioned just scattered everywhere throughout Istanbul today, up to and including the Hagia Sophia, the biggest building in the entire city. But all of the military stuff, all of the military expansion, that last sort of gasp of what was once the glory of the Roman Empire in antiquity, that last hurrah for Romanness in the Mediterranean, for a Roman Mediterranean, that was made possible by Belisarius. There is no other person who could have done what he did.
It sounds insane that he even pulled it off to begin with, even with his track record.
Yeah, he is simultaneously the luckiest and the unluckiest man that has ever lived. Belisarius himself, he's such an interesting character. He's the way I've always kind of seen him. It's not fully accurate to who he was or his character, but as a simplification, I think it makes sense. The way I always see him is he was a virtuous and righteous man with a strong survival instinct, forced to survive in a setting where he had to be ruthless and backstabbing.
Mm-hmm. That sounds about right.
And sometimes he could meet that standard, and sometimes he just constitutionally was not able to. He was a purely military general with absolutely no interest in politics in a system where every single position in the military is an inherently political position. And it kind of ended up ruining his life. Well, I can't say that. He retired. He died in his sleep, rich and fat and happy on a beautiful villa that he owned. I can't say that his life was necessarily ruined, but he just went through so much horseshit for the glory and the might and the awe of a man who, on the best of days, would not have given him the time of day.
Who didn't really appreciate what was done for him.
And this whole generation that I've talked about this episode, Belisarius and Justinian, but also Antonina and Theodora, all four of them, hugely influential figures in their time. They are the poster children for this period of history. They made this period, and they are often remembered both in academic history and in popular history. They're often referred to as the last Romans, or the last of the Romans. That is because for a variety of reasons. For one, they are the generation who created the last great expanse of the Roman Empire of antiquity before it retreated into its sort of lumbering husk that it became as like a zombie superpower in the Middle Ages. They were the last to experience that and to create that, and from the time that they were all gone forward, it was a constant process of retreat. And for another reason, Justinian, obviously, he was the last Roman emperor to be a native Latin speaker. From this point forward, every single Byzantine emperor is going to be Greek, a native Greek speaker. Eventually, you'll get to the point where the Roman emperors can't even speak Latin anymore. And a final big reason is that these people are the last Romans because they are the last people to embody the traditional concepts of what being Roman in antiquity really looked like. The emperor, who was a great reformer and a great builder of monuments and buildings and projects, and a great expander of borders. All of those facets are what are used to describe all of the greatest generals of the Roman Empire of antiquity. And very few men like that are going to wear the purple after Justinian. And none of them as successfully as he did. He is the last emperor to embody that. Belisarius embodied the traditional ideals of the great Roman generals, the great military men of Roman might. Completely ruthless, brilliant strategists, and when they had to be as well, compassionate leaders as well. That sort of ideal. And from this point forward, this is where I kind of consider the dividing line. The death of Justinian is when it stops being the Roman Empire and starts being the Byzantine Empire. That is when that begins, in my mind at least.
I mean, everything I know, granted, it comes from you, makes sense to have that divide.
Yeah. They will continue to call themselves the Roman Empire.
But it's not truly the Roman Empire.
It becomes something different after Justinian. It evolves into something else. It evolves into Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire, and the great Eastern Christian superpower of the Middle Ages, the mysterious Greek block of like a curious relic of antiquity, now relegated to a lumbering zombie of a state, eternally fighting off the armies of Islam from the south and the armies of Slavic migrants to the north, until eventually it all becomes too much and they become overpowered, and eventually, just like the fall of the Western Roman Empire represented the end of the ancient classical antiquity period, the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire represents the end of the medieval period. And that is what we have left to look forward to once we pass the death of Justinian and Belisarius. And I'm, of course, very much oversimplifying it. There are a lot of complicated ins and outs to get through, but
we've got plenty of story to tell from the Roman empires, you're saying, but it's not going to be the same kind of lineage as it was before.
Right. I haven't even gotten to Basil II yet. Holy shit, that's a great story. Basil the Bulgar killer. God, I fucking love that story.
Go ahead and cite your sources, Derek.
Oh, yeah. My sources... Oh, shit, I didn't write them down. Hold on. I've got the books right here. Hold on. Obviously, I've got The Secret History, written by Procopius. First time I've used like a primary first-person source for
for any of my topics before. Usually I use like already collected information from previous writers. I have Belisarius, the Last Roman General by Ian Hughes. And I also read, this one isn't really a source, but it was a fun read and it helped me kind of collect my thoughts on this. Kind of put some perspective on it. This is actually a novelization of the life of Belisarius by a really great writer named Robert Graves. He wrote this in 1938. It's called Count Belisarius. And it's really good if you like history, but you want something that's more of like a novel. It is wonderful.
So where can they find you on social media, Derek?
They can find me on Twitter at Visigoth. The first I is a 1, the O is a 0. They can find me on Blue Sky at Visigoth. The O is a 0. The first I is just a regular I. Tim, where can they find you?
They can find me on both Twitter and Blue Sky at Tim, aka Otis. Then they can find the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at the Alexander Society Pod, and then Twitter and Blue Sky at Alex Society Pod. And then they can find our outtakes and beer reviews, also announcements of new episodes when it's live on TikTok at Alexander Society. And if they have enjoyed what they've heard today, please give us a rate and review on your streaming platform of choice, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye.